Thanks, Carrie. And we're going to work for 2 hours and then do some questions, right? Is that the timeline here?
That's fine.
Perfect. It's very interesting sitting here on my perch in Elmira, not looking at faces and trying to see who's here, and thinking about this time, a little later this time last year when I was in Albuquerque looking out at Old Town and at the Regenerate conference. So I think we'll do through the magic of how we can do almost as good as telepathy when we're working in virtual stuff, and try and gather up the same kind of energy that we had in that room. I'm gonna share my screen, and what I want to talk about today is we're going to talk about homeopathy, but we're going to talk about it if you've come to listen with sort of a narrow mind about, let's talk about homeopathy as the little white pills and whatever that we give to creatures when they're in crisis. I'd like to take a step back actually and talk about stuff that may not seem like homeopathy on the surface, because most of the time when this subject is presented, it's presented as a, oh my goodness, something's broken, let's fix it, as opposed to a fully formed sort of art and science. And one of the things that we need to really understand when we're talking about doing homeopathy in the broader sense is that it's actually a system of medicine. It's not just giving little white pills at a time of crisis or when the regular stuff quits or it doesn't work. And so we're going to talk a little bit about holistic management, because that's another one of my passion things, and I'm sure some folks in the background or in the audience have some experience. I don't know who's in my audience totally. I know some of you, I recognize some names. Some people like just have email addresses and I have no idea who you are. I'm curious if you can go in the chat box, which I can't see, and just give me a sense of how many people are new to grazing, because Carrie said this is going to be a more introductory lecture, or an introductory audience, I mean, than a seasoned grazer audience. I'm not sure that's true, just looking at the couple names that I recognize in the registration list. And I'm also curious, what the experience is with natural medicines in general, and also with homeopathy specifically. And maybe my colleagues on the presentation team can help just sort of sort that out. So we've got a little bit of a idea who's in the audience as we're talking. And I just like to wander in and start. One of the things that we want to do today is just start to learn to think in a manner that's different than you might have already thought in the past. And I think that's really important. I think there's a lot of times we just get trapped because we're in the same thought pattern. And good heavens, if nothing's happened here in the last 6 or 8 or almost 12 months, actually, we're starting to think in different ways and exploring ways of doing things that we might not have done before. For some crazy reason, I am not getting much satisfaction making my slides go fast. So one of the other things that we just want to remember is that, with understanding and practice is mastery. So we're not going to learn all this stuff overnight. I've been doing this for over 35 years, and I still think every day is a new day, and it's amazing and newly honed. So we want to get people at a skill level where they're getting consistent results and reliable results, and they're not being frustrated, and they can get themselves in and out of situations because you understand functionally what's going on in the situation, not that it's a this for that kind of experience. And so I'm going to use some slides. We're going to talk about some cases. We're going to talk about some ways it It can be. One of the things that really happens, and I spend a lot of time coaching both veterinarians and others about how to use homeopathy and how to start integrating holistic management into their farms and businesses. And one of the things that we find happens all the time is it's a whole different way of looking at things. We have to rewire our thought processes. And that can be a really tough kind of thing to do sometimes. We get stuck in our ways, we get attached to our belief systems, we get attached to the investment that we've made, both monetary and emotional. And it's really scary to get out there in places that we're not familiar with. So one of the things is just, let's keep our heads open and our minds open. I don't think anybody's got a rusted shut mind here. One of the really fundamental things to talk about when we're talking about this whole topic is the difference between reductionist thinking and vitalist thinking. And the medical world and the science world, capital S science world, tends to have, in the relatively recent time, has put itself into the reductionist box. And what the reductionist box says is that if I know every little thing about every little part, and I can tell you how big it is and what it's made out of, and draw it and make an analytical thing about it and run it through a spectrophotometer and do all of those things, then I must know about this. And then we start putting the parts together. And I use a car for an example. So you can know all about the little parts. You can know the tires, you can know the history, you can know the dudes who made them, you can know who did this brake system, you can know who invented this, you can know when this was hepped up and that was done, and when they changed the bumpers, and all the specs on all of the parts and bits and capacities and mileages and all of that sort of stuff. And it doesn't mean that you know how to get the car from here to the corner, much less drive the car in traffic or on ice or on the freeway or through Chicago or back it up or anything like that. So one of the things that we start to think about, and that will really help you be successful as you start to learn to hone your skills in the whole approach to homeopathy and also to grazing and managing farms and ecosystems this way, is starting about thinking about vitalism. And vitalism is that it's all attached. You know, the ankle bone's attached to the knee bone, the shoulder bone's attached to the ear bone, the cattle are attached to the hogs, the soil is attached to the forage, the cattle are attached to the soil. It's just all this one amazing, huge, interactive thing. And what happens in one corner of the part of the thing affects the other corners and the other parts of and the other things in the thing. And we'll talk about that when we talk a little bit about the difference between holism and homeopathy. But this is really, really important. And I get called all the time to fix stuff that is looked at in isolation instead of fixing stuff that are working with stuff, because it's not broken. It's just doing the best it can in the situation it's in. But instead of working with that stuff in the context of a larger thing. And people get really frustrated when they call me and they want to know, hey, Sue, what's the problem? Like, what remedy can I give for my cows with pink eye? And we typically stand back and say, usually it's not a remedy issue with pink eye, it's a grazing management issue. So you can fix your grazing management, or you can roll pink eye boulders up the hill. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about vitalism. And we talk about that intergenerational nourishment of things where the soil and the animals and the humans and the larger ecology and the wildlife are all connected, and that we're not necessarily in it for the moment, but we're in it for the longer term. We might be in it for the season, the generation, a lot of my cultural background is 7 generations and those sorts of things. So I've got a bias to holistic management. I know a lot of people who come to this meeting have some background in holistic management and planned grazing and that sort of stuff. And the thing that really is exciting to me, and I've found in over time, that things that are true, like capital T, true, tend to be true in a lot of different circumstances and systems. So you don't have to change the rules for everything that, every situation that you're in. And so one of the things that just fascinates me is how holistic management and the art and science of homeopathy are really interdigitated, and how they really share a lot of fundamentals, broad brush fundamentals, but they also share a lot of like the fine tuning fundamentals. So I want to take just a little bit of time as we're working here today to go through that, so you can look at how those are shared. So we look at the decision making, planning, and monitoring process that's holistic management. People think, oh yeah, it's just grazing, but it's way more than that. And we know that it's measured. We talk about that triple bottom line of the economic and social and environmental stuff. I left this whole slide on here so you have the context. It's actually a slide from a holistic management chat that I have with people, but I left it on in the whole context. So as you look at the slide, these things, this ecosystem process that we use in the language of holistic management discipline, are the same things that we use in the language of homeopathy when we talk about community herd dynamics. We talk about mineral cycles, we talk about water cycles, we talk about energy flow, and those things. Now, how we manage them may be a little bit different, but they're actually quite similar. So those processes hold true through, and I'll show you how. And we look, just to remind you guys who are holistic management folks, here are the kinds of testing questions that we commonly use. We can also morph that into our discussions about how do you want it with homeopathy. And one of the ones, we look at cause and effect a lot. We look at the weak links, what is it that's really creating this situation? We look at the source of energy, and are we using it in the best way? Again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's nonsensical and frustrating to try and medicate your way out of a management situation. So we've got those kinds of similarities. Again, this is just to remind us of the pillars of holistic management. And so I want you to think about the similarities as we work through the material. So we're looking at the whole that's under management. We talk about the decision makers and the resource bases and the money that's involved, and how do we best spend our money for the biggest bang. And so when we're talking about homeopathy practice, I encourage you to think beyond the, oh my gosh, this animal is sick or broken or isn't working or is doing something that's scaring me or something I don't like, or however that is. And I encourage you to start to think about not just the individual, but also where is that individual in the herd, and how could there be relationship happening that might be influencing that individual's place in the herd, might be influencing how it presents with symptoms. It could be as silly or simple as it's on the low end of the totem pole, so it gets shoved out and doesn't get enough groceries. Having an empty belly and being cold and wet in the winter is going to stress them more, and they're going to get overtly sick. They're going to show me symptoms. And unless we address all of the rest of the cascade, it doesn't matter what you doctor them with. You can doctor them with conventional antibiotics and whatever else. I mean, I haven't used antibiotics in my practice for probably 30 years. So, however the conventional guys will doctor, or we can doctor with natural medicines, but it isn't going to make any difference unless we look at that individual in the context of the herd. And then I would also encourage you to take a step back and look at your farm or your ranch, and how does those animals, and how do they fit into that larger whole? And if you've got lots of species, and I could have drawn a really complicated diagram here, and I would draw it if we were in person and I had a whiteboard or a chalkboard. We've got another group of species for you guys who layer species on. And we've got this farm or ranch that's sitting in a larger community, an ecosystem of farms and ranches in the watershed, and watersheds within watersheds. And it just gets really big and really exciting when we start thinking about what kind of change we can affect. The thing that I would really encourage you to look at and ask yourself really hard is, how do you want it to be? What kind of life do you want to lead? What kind of production and forms of production do you want to use to get to that? And what kind of resource base do we want to leave, to create in the future and leave as a legacy? And I put this you know, this is the fundamental question in holistic management, but it's also one of the fundamental questions in homeopathy, as I'll show you in the slides, because people use this tool in different ways. Some people use it as a really, you know, discrete thing. You know, it's just a substitution for regular medicine. And other people embrace it more fully and really understand it as an art and science that's broader influence. So as you look and work through how are things on your farms or your ranches or your homesteads or your home, because I don't know how everybody, you know, where everybody lives and what they do for a living, but part of that question is, you know, how do you want that to be, and what do we need to do to get ourselves to where we want that to be? What we find is people often plan in error about how are you getting there as opposed to where are we going, and there's a lot of energy spent on how are we getting there, and we don't have a clear idea of where we're getting.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So one of the things talking about, I don't know who's chattering, but maybe we can mute mics or something just so we don't have a lot of crosstalk. So one of the things that we see when we're talking about using homeopathy is, how do we use it? What are the approaches to using it? And some people use it as a substitution for compliance. They've decided that, you know, they're in an organic system and, oh my gosh, we can't use antibiotics. And so we got to find some other tools. And I've heard that homeopathy works or is one of the tools we can use. But I really don't care about homeopathy. I really don't care about natural medicines. I'm just trying to be compliant with the program that I'm working in. And some people will use homeopathy as, you know, I've got a sick dog, I've got a sick duck, I've got a sick cow. I've tried all this other stuff and it doesn't work. I've got an appointment at the rendering plant or for euthanasia or whatever. And you know, I've come to the end of all the light I know, and I need to shine some different kind of light on it. Some people are more invested in, say, a management system like a grazing system or an organic based system or something like that, a regenerative type of system, but they still just do healthcare as a crisis at the moment. Oh, it's broke, we need to fix it and move on. But they never kind of look backwards and see how they got there, and they never really look forwards and see where things are going. Sometimes we'll see people will use homeopathy and we look at the individual over time. How does the body articulate symptoms? How do those symptoms change over time? If I treat here, moving forward, how does the body switch and change over time, even though the thing that we're observing might not have the same diagnostic label as I looked at here on my timeline as I move out here, but we can still see patterns. This is the foundational stuff, is looking at patterns, looking at patterns, looking at patterns, looking at patterns, and you'll see that. And then some people really, this is where homeopathy and the fullness of the art and science really excites me, is looking at it as a method of looking at intergenerational enhancement of both vitality. So the overall vitality and state of health gets influenced both in the animal that we're treating, but also in subsequent generations. That's why I have that picture of that beautiful old cow and her calf. She was 16, I think, when that picture was taken. And so we've got incredible potential, particularly, this is where it's so exciting, doing homeopathy work in food animals, looking at food and dairy and even fiber. That's even more exciting than doing homeopathy in horses and cows or horses and dogs and cats, is because we are either breeding the replacement stock for our farm or ranch, or we can work within systems that we can elevate intergenerational health and look at long-term issues and start just elevating the whole system. In the same way that we see land management changes, seasonal, we get better carrying capacity, we get better soil movement, we get more nutritious bites, we get more bites per acre. The same thing can happen in a healthcare system. And that just, I can't tell you how much that excites me to see that happen. So We talk about in holistic management that continuous planning and decision-making loop. You plan, you always plan in pencil, God knows, because you plan wrong usually. You monitor, you assess it, you can make controls and amend it, and you replan. Homeopathy does the same thing, because one of the things that we do in this is yeah, with experience, it's not like we guess on the remedy. We don't play spin the bottle or ask the Ouija board or whatever. I mean, you choose the remedies thoughtfully, the medicines thoughtfully, but what happens is we play the medicine card to the individual plays the response card back at us, and based on that response, which we'll talk about in a couple slides, maybe 20 slides, then we either continue our plan, make an amendment, make a new dose, make a new remedy, make a new medicine. So it's exactly the same philosophy. It's not a one and done thing. It's a back and forth interaction, call and response kind of thing. So what this means, in the same way that we have to do this as grazers, and I don't know anybody in the grazing world who thinks they're done, like every year we hone these skills. We develop an eye for the stock and the land. We learn to speak land. Our biological monitoring improves. We learn to speak livestock. We understand the species adaptations that we have to make. I have to work differently with sheep and goats than cattle. They have more similarities and differences, but they do have differences. Same with working differently with sheep and goats. Same with, we see the same thing in all the species, but the reality is there's more similarities than there are differences. And we learn how to troubleshoot before we get into trouble. And so we need to look really, I cannot overemphasize this enough. We need to understand that most of what we are called, we, the veterinary profession, and we, the herdsman, stockman, farmer, are called to treat are actually due to errors in management and husbandry. And so what happens is we end up thinking that we need to apply some sort of treatment like a pill or an injection or a potion or a lotion or an herb, or I don't care what the treatment is, but in a situation when the real solution is that we need to change our management ways. And the power of species appropriate management and species appropriate husbandry, I cannot emphasize that enough. Even if we weren't talking about homeopathy, I still can't emphasize it enough. And this is what people see, particularly folks that move from a confinement system into a grazing system. They get like all excited because all of a sudden, a lot of things, I mean, they have maybe some new issues and things to manage and work around. But a lot of the stuff that we deal with in confinement, we don't see in grazing systems. And part of that is because it's a more species appropriate system of management. It is more species normal, species natural, species appropriate to have animals on the land than it is to have them on concrete. It's more species appropriate, and we'll talk about the difference between ruminants and monogastrics in a minute, but we don't need to feed cows like hogs. We need to feed cattle like the herbivorous ruminants that they are. We don't need to feed cattle like hogs. And the majority of the cattle feeding system in this country, on this continent, and worldwide is we've suddenly taken a ruminant animal and we're feeding them like a monogastric, and it just doesn't work at all. We get them into all sorts of metabolic trouble. We get them into all sorts of metal on metal trouble, and we spend a lot of time treating and amending to do that. So I can't overemphasize this enough in case you hadn't noticed. So just in the way, when we start to look at forages and pastures and that sort of stuff, we learn how to speak land. When we start looking at, from our perspective of rewiring as a homeopath and as a whole system stockman, we start to learn how to speak beast. And the language of each species is a little different, but they're fundamentally the same. And one of the first things that we need to understand, particularly when we're working in grazing systems, and I see this all the time, you gotta look at form and function. And what people try and do in grazing systems all the time is take a dump truck to the Daytona 500 And as soon as we try and do that, as soon as we try and take an animal who is built better for a confinement system or a heavy energy input system, grain type energy input system, and throw their backsides out there on pasture, we know that you're going to have to be a better stockman and a better pasture management to make this system work. And so I would encourage people to just like take that fundamental step back and realize that as we ask animals to perform on grass, on forage, in a grazing system, in a managed grazing system, if we can pick animals that are built to do that, rather than animals that we are attached to because they happen to have a certain pedigree, because they happen to be related to my great aunt Sophia's first dairy goat that she ever had, that they have a particular color, or even indeed that they're a particular class of stock or species of stock, we're going to be further ahead. So this is a pretty nice little no-name cow, but she's built for forage. Those, you guys who don't know me, I'm about 5'9", 5'9.5". That fence comes up to, you know, just my breastbone, and that's not a very big animal. She's low to the ground, she's deep bodied, she's got lots of room for rumen, she's got nice fine bones, she's going to have a high butter fat, she's going to have good in the bucket as a milk cow, she's going to be good in the baby raising as a meat cow. So we start looking for animals that just by their very nature, these are pig fat cattle on crappy pastures, but just by their very nature, they excel on forage. And if you can learn to pick those animals out, I'm here to tell you that so much of your problems are going to evaporate. And it's one of my favorite things to do. You know, we want animals that look different than a lot of the show cows look, or the show sheep, or pick a species. I don't know what we've got in the audience as far as I can talk about any species and I don't care which one, but we want those animals that can, on a forage diet, grow a calf that's, you know, 3/4 of her size every year. Same with these sheep, you know, so that they can really excel. Those are the animals that we want on our team, and those are the things that are going to keep you out of the medicine box. So when we start looking at the difference between monogastrics and ruminants, this is the other thing that we need to wrap our heads around. And I can think like this. I don't think like this naturally. I can give you all sorts of metabolic things and you know, capital S in the box science things. But just recognize that monogastrics, things with one stomach, so poultry and hogs, basically in our conversations, and humans and horses, function differently than ruminants or animals with 3 stomachs. True ruminants have four digestive compartments. We do have some that have 3 that are not true ruminants, but for this conversation, we lump them into that. So we've got metabolic differences, how they function. We've got nutritional differences, how they function. And we've got management differences, how they function. But the biggest difference is that it is really, really, really hard on a monogastric to throw them out in a forage field and expect them to survive without some assistance. So monogastrics generally, to be well nourished and function well, and also to function as in a cost-effective model as well, you know, when we think about them as production animals, need to have some extra source of energy. So it's all very nice to put these hogs out on pasture. There's 1,000,006 reasons to do it. I can tell you, you know, like we can talk about that for 2 hours if you want. But they don't do really well. You know, all of these romantic notions that I'm going to put my pigs out in the oak trees and finish them in a timely manner, that's a really hard management thing to do. And it sometimes really stresses the animals. And so we need to realize that these monogastrics, even though they have that big kind of weird sort of spiral cecal colon thing that acts a little bit as a fermentation vat, they don't have that big fermentation vat that the ruminants have. So all we're really doing when we're feeding a ruminant, we're feeding the organisms in that rumen vat. It's the same thing we're doing when we're feeding soil. Look at the rumen that we're standing on when we stand on the earth. These guys need a little help, and they tend to need help in the form of energy, and that energy is usually supplied to them as some sort of grain-based feed. Same with poultry. You know, yeah, they can take nutrition from forage. They can take nutrients certainly from the bugs and the critters and the stuff that they chase. But because they're monogastrics, we need to supplement them to have their optimal health, and also that balance of marrying health and production, which is where the confinement guys get in a little trouble, you know, or some confinement guys get in a little trouble. We need to recognize that we need to have some forage for these guys, or some energy for these guys, usually in the form of a grain or a mixture of grains. And I get a lot of people call me. I spend a lot of work with the pastured poultry people because one of the hats I wear is president of the board of that association. And I get a lot of people call me up and they want to have 100% pastured chickens that don't have any wheat, don't have any corn, don't have any soy, don't have any spelt, don't have anything. They just want them out on the grasses and trying to make eggs. And they wonder why they're not making eggs. And they wonder why it's taking, if they even finish, why they finish at, 3 pounds a bird in, months. So we need to just recognize that. And I can't overemphasize that enough either. This is a situation, these guys do what they need to do to survive. Now, this is a situation where these guys were not starved for grain on purpose. The guy had grain in front of them, but the mixture was wrong. And these animals just tore the heck out of the pasture, trying to make it right for themselves, but their rate of lay dropped to like 80%. So we really talk about these things that modify naturally occurring symptoms in the species that we're working with. The other kinds of things that modify naturally occurring symptoms, the things that we want to treat, when we put let's pick a medicine up and treat with it. But some of the other things, we talked about diets that are inappropriate for the species or the individual. We get called all the time to treat stuff that aren't being fed the right stuff or aren't being fed in the right balance. And we see also get called to treat situations where you have procedures and medicines and stuff that alter the symptoms without changing the tendency to produce the symptom. And we'll see that sometimes like with joint supplements in horses. We don't use those very often unless you got show cows or big breeding cows, or same with small ruminants. But in horses and cats and dogs, a lot of times we'll use a joint supplement that allows them to move more freely, but it doesn't change the tendency for them to move that way in the first place. Or we put a special shoe on that makes it so they move more freely, but it doesn't change the tendency of the foot to grow in the physical way it's growing, or it doesn't change the tendency of the foot to grow in the quality that it's growing. Supplements are another bucket that this comes under too, is we can, and we do it all the time therapeutically. And we do it in, the forage-based regenerative guys use it as much as the conventional guys use it, but the conventional guys have got it honed to a fine craft, so when we start talking about some of the feed additives and other supplements that get used to manage symptoms of species inappropriate husbandry or management. The other kinds of things, and we're not going to dwell on this immediately, but I just want to show these to you, is other things that modify these symptoms and change the picture, artificially create a situation that we could be tricked into thinking is actually a disease when it's not, is vaccination, over administration of vaccination, unnecessary vaccinations, vaccinating animals who are sick or stressed, vaccinating animals who are already protected. I talked to quite a few people last year who had animals who were already stressed. It was crappy cold winter. It was pouring rain. We didn't have really great feed in for a bunch of reasons because of the summer conditions there. We already had animals who were wobbling, and they brought them in and they piled a bunch of vaccines in them, and their wobble turned to first side down. It was a real challenge. And those animals, had they been worked back through it, and we could see that those animals, it was a grass-based cattle system. They were really energy deficient. They had protein that was adequate, but their energy was way less than they needed. So they had an imbalance between not just a deficiency of energy, but an imbalance also between the protein and energy ratio. They were wobbling like crazy, and you add the vaccinations to the top, and they literally fell over. I mean, some of them fell over hard enough that they don't have funerals. They went to the rendering plant, and some of them fell over hard enough that they really had to treat them pretty aggressively. And then the other thing that we see a lot of is just overexposure to chemicals and pesticides and, herbicides and tobacco smoke and preservatives and toxins and stuff. So my job as a homeopath, and your job as a homeopath or user of homeopathic medicines, is to actually take the symptoms of the patient that they show us, and we match them to the symptoms of our medicine. And we know what the symptoms of our medicine are, because for all of the proven medicines, they've actually either been given to a healthy individual, and that creates a bunch of symptoms that we know is the character of that medicine, or we've proven that this medicine changes in the appropriate manner some clinical situation. So we know what the symptoms of the medicine are. And so the game is to match the symptoms of my patient with the symptoms of the medicine as best as possible. And so there's no point at all if I've got symptoms that are not just of the patient's naturally occurring imbalance, but are also because of feeding or mismanagement or overdose or underdose of supplements. You can see now that my medicine symptoms it's going to be hard to match, and it's not going to be accurate, and it's not going to give you great results. You're going to have to use more and more and more management and time and changing and stuff to try and deal with that, because you've got the body is not singing in its natural tune, it's singing in an adulterated tune. And so we're trying to match that. I'm here to tell you, it's going to make your life hard as a homeopath, and it's not going to work in the long time. You're not going to be happy. And so that's one of the things that we need to think about. So one of the things to consider here is, how does this consideration of modifiers of symptoms and the disease, the diagnostic label actually, to the obstacles to that clear expression of the disease, and the obstacles also not just to the symptoms, but actually that individual's ability to actually get it together and respond to whatever the treatment that we're giving them is. If they're running on 3 cylinders instead of 10 cylinders, and we're not doing anything to help them run on to maybe 7 cylinders, putting medicine on the top of them like peanut butter isn't going to be very helpful in the long run. So when you start thinking about it, for those of you who are doing holistic management work, and we start looking at that, how does that mindset and thought process that work together to help us look at it? And one of the things, I mean, that's what we talk about in holistic management when we talk about long log jams and weak links and root causes of things. And if we're going to get the biggest bang for our buck, we need to take those things out and manage there, not manage up here. So in homeopathy land, in the language of that discipline, that's something that's called hygiene. And I don't mean hygiene like clean, wash your hands and scrub your pots and vacuum your rug. I'm talking about hygiene like food and water and the things that we're going to talk about next. So again, this is what we've been talking about here for the beginning of this. And I know it doesn't sound like maybe what you thought homeopathy needed to sound like, but this is fundamental, foundational stuff. And if you don't get this stuff, you're going to have a really big trouble when you start, trying to fool around with remedies and systems. So fix it there. And that's what happens at a little bit, even when we move from a confinement system to a grazing system. Then we move into a more and more and more well-managed, well-managed, well-monitored grazing system, and the the stuff that needs doctored decreases, and actually the stuff that I look at to doctor in those situations are different things, and we can talk about that after a bit if people want. I want to move on with this. So things to think about, things that create symptoms. Water, we know this. I'm going to fly through this information. We also, this is here to remind me to talk about glyphosate. For those of you who know me, you know that it's not my most favorite chemical in the world. You know the history of it. It's patented as an antibiotic. It's got a strong action. It acts systemically. It acts in really low doses. It grabs up minerals and makes them not available. Even if we see them in the soil test, even if we see them in the hair analysis, they're not available for biological function. And it kills off bacterial populations, and it makes the good guys go down. It makes the bad guys go up. It has all sorts of endocrine disruption stuff and all sorts of things. And the reason that I talk about, the reason that I want to talk about glyphosate, I can, we can do the anti-glyphosate thing, which is not the point here. The reason that I want to talk about glyphosate is because I get called all the time for sick stuff that they think a homeopathic medicine is going to fix that isn't. It's a glyphosate toxicity. It gets missed. People don't realize that's what they're dealing with. We see everything from sudden death. I've told some of the members of this group about a farmer that I worked with that moved 800 cattle, a lot of bred cows, some not so late bred, 800 head in, moving from one area to the other, bought some hay in, and woke up the next morning and probably 200 and some of them were dead, and 300 and some of them were trying to push their babies out well before they needed to push their babies out. It was a train wreck, and that all got tracked back to some glyphosate contamination on Roundup Ready alfalfa that unfortunately they bought from their cousins. It was a mess, but until we recognized what it was, you couldn't get a handle on treating it. We see diarrhea, we see scours, we see stuff that looks like Johne's disease. We see a lot of atypical botulism that can look like dead cows. It can look like failure to weight gain. It can look like feedlot stress. They tend to have paralysis. They tend to have paralysis of their tongues. They drink like this instead of sucking up like they drink. We see that in adults. We see it a lot in the Western provinces and the Western states. That people don't know what they're seeing. We were never taught about atypical botulism in vet school. People don't know what they're seeing. The diagnosis gets missed, and it's a bizarre situation. And so that's why I talk about glyphosate. And you can give all the remedies in the world that might try and manage the acute presentation, but you're never going to get it repaired unless we come in with some other things. And I'm happy to take questions about that later. So the more you work on this continuum, the more success that you're going to have. And homeopathy works better. I mean, it works. It's a tremendous system of medicine, but it works better and it works with more success if we're not doing crisis management with it and we're looking at the whole thing that we've been talking about. The other thing to talk about just quickly is that whole difference about monoculture versus diversity. So when we look at the advantages and disadvantages of, we want in our pasture and our forage management systems, we're usually further ahead to have a diverse sward. So we've got different plants that have different jobs and different mineral imbalances or balances and work in different seasons so that we can have a consistent level of nutrition across seasons and that sort of stuff. We can also talk about like diversity sequentially too. So we do that with using summer annuals and special needs and that sort of stuff. We can do it with multi-species grazing as well. This is a really crappy picture of multi-species grazing because it's not a particularly well-managed grazing setup, but we can do multi-species grazing where they're all in there at the same time or more commonly, we do multi-species grazing where we're actually applying the other species in an integrated pest management kind of system, so that we're applying them to solve an issue. It may be an issue of a different kind of forage that one species doesn't like and the other species will eat. Sometimes it's a difference between grasses and forbs and browses and woody plants. Sometimes we apply the other species as an integrated pest management solution, say to a parasite issue. So we see that in both cattle and small ruminants. Oftentimes we'll use small ruminants in a cattle rotation because the parasites, they don't share the species. They share similar parasites, but they don't share the species between the species. And we often will put poultry into a rotation for a couple of reasons, because there's really a lot of diversity in the actual parasites. And we also put them in that rotation just for the mechanics. Sometimes if you don't have a really biologically active system that's getting your manure broken down and reintegrated, they're scratching and moving and digging and stuff. And we can also use the poultry as a management tool if you've got a place that's under fertile and doesn't have a lot of biology. We can put those birds, those animals in there in a set area, and we can get some nutrient on the land, some manure on that land, and then get them off. This is to remind me that one of the big mistakes that we see is managing for season. One of the biggest things that grazers don't want to do is feed stored feed in the growing season. And sometimes the management system that we need to get ourselves out of trouble is to actually feed stored feed in the growing season. And I see that a lot. We can talk about pink eye now or later, but I see that pink eye is the one thing that I really see a lot, that, you know, we'll see it in the really washy grasses where the energy is low, the protein is high, and they don't have enough energy. They don't have enough selection. They're eating down too much, which is exacerbating the protein energy imbalances. And that they'll start to, they look like they're 250 pounds light. They start to U their necks up. They start to pee-pee step along. They don't stride out nicely on their shoulder. They start to pant. They're not panting because they're hot. They're panting because they don't have enough energy to keep them metabolically moving properly. And they start to get sweaties on their noses, and they start to have runnies on their eyes. And as that is perpetuated and oftentimes augmented with some mineral imbalances, then we start, and some tendency of the individual, then we start to see like pink eye stuff. And we can potion and doctor on the pink eye stuff, but I'll tell you, we can fix that literally at the root, on the stump, by changing our pasture management, how it's presented, and how it's presented, and what it's comprised of. And so this is just to remind everybody that we need to not underestimate the power of dry hay in a grazing ration. And for people who are doing, you know, holistic management stuff, grazing tall, those sorts of things, we'll start to realize that we're seeing, because of the way the plant species are and the older stuff is there, and we haven't just grazed everything down and scared it to death and then it's grown up, and the old in at 8 out at 2 kind of plan that we used to use back in the day. We can either have those animals get that different quality of forage by our timing on the pasture, or we actually carry it to them. There's different ways to do it, but it's important. Here's a situation where these dairy cattle, immediately off to the screen, they had a what you would think of as a pasture beside, but they also planted some grazing corn, and actually the cattle actually went for the weeds and forbs before they actually went for the corn when we cut them into this pattern. So we can talk about how we manage seasonally. This is another consideration. Please don't use these work okay. They're uncomfortable for a bunch of reasons, but they're like cooking machines if you use them in the South and some parts of the Midwest. And so you're going to have birds that you're going to be calling me about what to do with dying chickens, or what to do with panting chickens, or what's the remedy for, and the remedy for it is to get them out of the cooking houses and get them into a system that's got a little bit more airflow and a little bit more motion. The other thing I can't overemphasize enough is most of our winter woes, from winter dysentery to coccidia to all sorts of stuff. We got to keep the groceries in front of these guys. They've got high energy requirement. As soon as it's cold, as soon as they're wet, their energy requirement goes up by the tens, into like 60, 70, 80% more energy is needed to maintain those guys as the temperature drops, but if they're wet. So if they're standing in mud, if they're standing in water, if they're rained upon, you know, like depending on your geography, but it's just phenomenal. You can't, the math, when you start to do the math, there isn't a homeopathic medicine in the world is going to fix that cattle beast until you get some groceries into them that are balanced. And you know, so everybody works in a different place on this continuum. I know where I prefer my clients to work and the people that we do group coaching with to work. I know where I prefer to work. I know that we're in some situations where people can't work that way because they're not the primary decision maker in the farm or business, or because they've decided that that's where they want to work, and so we're trapped. But we need to really recognize that. And I think, I'm guessing, I don't know specifically, just going back to the list of who's in the room here with me, what I suspect is that many of you are you know, captains of your own ship in a way, so that you can actually make management decisions on your farm, on your ranch, in your landscape that can influence these things. And we've got a couple of paper cases in a minute that some situations we didn't have the ability to do that, and that just makes things. I've finally learned. I mean, I do get frustrated with it, but sometimes I've learned, like, you know, it's not mine to change. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink the stuff. So we all know that there's a lot of cattle in this continent that are raised like this, but we know that these animals are going to have really different needs, nutritional needs, healthcare needs, basic, like, where are they on this continuum of vibrantly healthy, stressed, not stressed. These cattle are going to need to get propped up in a different way, with much more enthusiasm and much more authority and much more frequency than these cattle, or these cattle, or these cattle. These poultry, this is an organic, certified organic barn, but this group of poultry is going to have intrinsically different stress levels. It's going to have intrinsically different social structure. These birds, people say, oh, we got a door in here, and the birdies can go out the door and go outside where we have a place for them to go out and be on pasture. Social hierarchy of the chicken says in a house, particularly in a house like this, they do it all the time, but in a house like this, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but these chickens are not going to move basically beyond a group of about this much. And so there's no flipping way this bird is going to get itself out the door. You know, like, it's just not going to do it. So we've got totally different society stress stuff. I mean, for you guys who are in the geographies where we've had really strict lockdowns, you know, like, people whose one-bedroom apartments were working for them aren't working for them as easily now that we have, you know, both parties and a couple of kids and 3 people trying to do office work and school work and that sort of stuff. So that's what these chickens are doing, you know, like, their adrenal glands are up over their necks. They're doing, like, fighting behaviors. They're doing all sorts of things, and they need a different kind of propping up. Now, we can work. I've worked in these barns as a homeopath, but I need to recognize that they're not gonna, like, just take off like they had eyes. You know, it's like it's like you've always got, like, 3 more gears, or you're driving with the brake on in these situations, just because of the flop. These birds will have a totally different need for care. This is a confinement barn too, but you can see the stocking rate is way differently here. The stock rate is different and the stock density is different. They've got more room. They can do some natural behaviors. This bucket is actually an ash bath, and those birds, you can see, the picture's a little wonky, but you can see this bird, she's got sort of that cleaner red neck, and it's because she just got out of there and she's like all ash because she just buried herself. So these birds, even though they're confined and stuck inside, they're not on slats, they're actually on a bedded pack. They can walk around and be birds a little bit more. They can do social interaction. Their feed is presented to them in a more bird appropriate manner. They can do like some natural bird stuff like dust bath and stuff. These are broilers, not layers, but again, you can imagine that the kinds of pressure, both for performance, these are well-performing birds. I mean, they'll be on the hook, you know, before 7 weeks. But the healthcare issues in these birds are going to be way different than the healthcare issues in those other birds, and they tend to be more responsive to a lighter touch of intervention. We don't have to prop them up as hard, and we don't have to prop them up as aggressively. You know, we don't need to like go at them like this. We can just kind of go at them like this. And then this group of birds, now this group of birds is going to have a way different situation because these are pet birds. And yeah, they're out there, they got lots of room, there's good social interaction, they're able to dust and play and do all sorts of stuff, but they've got a different kind of stress. And this is the kind of stress that we see in show cows, we see in a lot of dogs and cats, we see in a lot of backyard chickens, we see it in show hogs, we see a lot in horses where they're trapped by the humans, you know, so, you know, everybody's kissing their chickens, they're making them do jobs that they might not want to do. They're very much forced into being in this kind of, you know, and so it's kind of, you know, it's like the stuff that humans are deciding that they're realizing that they're done, you know, they're being trapped in that expectation of performing in certain ways. And that in and of itself brings other health issues. So I'm going to come up for a half a breath of air. Can my wranglers, I don't want to leave this screen and see the chat box because it'll put me back at square zero. So I'm just going to ask if there's any specific questions from the material that I presented until now. And we're going to spend the next hour talking more about what you guys will think is pure homeopathy. So are there any, I think Neil's wrangling and Carrie's wrangling.
We have one, Susan, so far.
Okay.
And that is, what is the triple bottom line?
The triple bottom line is when we start to measure things by, I was trained in school and other places that I needed to do whatever it took to get the things out of the red and into the black. So we're used to the bottom line being dollars and cents. And in the triple bottom line, we actually measure things, not just like money, but we measure it by ecological and environmental impacts and rewards and stuff. And we also measure it by social stuff. So what's happening in the community. And when I came, I'll probably cry telling you this story. I can remember when I first met holistic management, and I was a new veterinary grad. I'd just been out probably in my first year. I graduated in 1987. So it was probably within the first year I was out, and I was already interested in doing holistic practice, and that wasn't getting a lot of really great reception, let me tell you, in 1987. Although I did work for the first veterinary acupuncturist in Canada. But I went to this ag meeting, and there was a session on holistic management, holistic financial planning, and I thought, oh, you know, I want to be a holistic veterinarian, and I'm going to go to this. I'm going to go to this, right? Because I'm not a very good financial planner, and I was having trouble with the black and the red numbers, you know. And that was the first time that I was ever, it was Peggy C. Chris and her husband, and it was the first time that I was ever kind of told or given permission or said it was okay or knew there was like a system where the priorities that I had from the environmental and ecological standpoint and the priorities that I had from how did I want my life to be standpoint, that I didn't have to give those up in order to make the red go away and the black come up. And that was a life-changing moment for me, like life-changing. You have no idea. that suddenly I didn't have to compromise integrity to have a successful business. And so that's the triple bottom line: financial, ecological, environmental, and social. Anything else?
Nothing right now.
Hearing nothing, I'll move on. Okay. So we saw this earlier when we talked about using homeopathy as a substitute for compliance, as approaching the individual at the crisis or fear thing at the moment, or the individual over its lifetime, or the intergenerational enhancement. So I just want to remind you about that. And the examples we're going to talk about will have most of those in there. Not so much this, I'm pointing at my screen because can't you tell? There on the screen, look. Not so much the substitution for compliance, but there's a lot of the individuals at the moment and the individuals over time, and there's this too. So I want to make some clarifications, because every time I talk about this, people get the H words confused, and they get the holistic word. Holistic means that we look at the whole. Now, ideally, it means that we look at the whole, not just the animal, but the herd and the farm and the whole environment, the ranch, the whole environment, that whole. But it also means in some uses that we understand that whatever's happening in the individual is happening to the whole individual. So you can't say to me that, my horse's stomach ulcers aren't related to its lameness, aren't related to its brain rot. And they are. And the reason they are is because they're all happening in the same individual. So you can't say to me that somebody's heart condition and their liver situation and their arthritis and their anxiety is not related. So they go and see all of these specialists who work in their silos instead of recognizing that it's all interrelated, because it's all happening in the one individual. So we can expand that whole from, remember the multi-wholes that we were talking about, and at the beginning, what is the whole that you're managing? Am I managing the animal as a whole? Am I managing the herd as a whole? Am I managing all the animals on the ranch, but they might be in different herds or they might be different species? Am I managing the ranch? Because then we talk the same thing, but we use different words, because then we're going to do like grazing planning versus nutrition for cows or whatever. So that's the H word. And the thing to remember is, regardless of what the whole is what affects the part affects the whole. So a butterfly really can flap its wings in South America and influence something. And this is one of the things I think is really important for us to realize now, because we're in really unprecedented times, and we're all, managing with as much grace and as much ease as is possible for each of our individual situations. But one of the things that's really interesting to me now is, how does change, it's always been interesting to me, how does change happen? What affects change? And I really believe in my heart that we can make change by individual actions that become joined, just the same way that the mycelium and mycorrhizal fungi are all joined underneath the soil. I believe that we can affect change, and for the better and for not the better, because of that whole idea of holism. So the other H word that people get confused is herbal. And I get this all the time. You talk to people about, do they do, what's your experience with homeopathy? Oh yeah, I use homeopathy a lot. So what do you do? Oh, I use comfrey ointment, or I feed saw palmetto for prostate issues, or I do one of a myriad of things. And I also wear a bit of a hat as an herbalist. I can, we could talk about that for a couple hours one time, but in this room today, let's not confuse herbal medicine as an art and science with homeopathy as an art and science. Now, a lot of our medicines that we use in homeopathy have an herbal base. They come either from plants or animals or minerals. Typically, there's some that are imponderable that come from like moonlight and x-rays and stuff. But so the history, if you really want to have fun, like it's really fun to talk about as homeopathy developed, how it developed in response to the medicines of the day. And a lot of the medicines of the day were indeed herbal medicines. And some of them were very strong chemical medicines like arsenic and phosphorus and aconite and mercury is the one that's slipping my mind. The other H word is the hygiene H word. And we've just spent the last hour talking about hygiene. So I'm not talking about washing your hands and doing your laundry. I'm talking about the capital H hygiene that creates the environment in which we are. The other clarification that I want to make for the rest of this conversation, so when I say homeopathy or homeopathic, you know what I'm saying, what I mean by this word, because it's a word that has a couple of different meanings. One meaning is that it's a substance that's potentized. And all potentized means is it's diluted and shaken and diluted and shaken and diluted and shaken. And so it goes from material to immaterial. And we do that literally through a series of making dilutions with usually in alcohol, but we can do it in water. Just ride with me for this. And that process of diluting and shaking is called potentization. And we can do that to anything. And you'll know, if you read the popular press, there's some growling about homeopathy, and some of the stuff that they're talking about as homeopathy isn't. It's the other H word of herbal. And some of it is potentized substances, but they're not being used in any way, shape, or form like we talk about when we're talking about homeopathy, the way we're talking about it here, which is a process in which we match the symptoms of the naturally occurring disease of the individual with the symptoms of the medicine. And we know what those symptoms are. I'll tell you about how we match, just hang on. But that's what we're talking about when we're talking about doing homeopathy, that we're matching the symptoms of the disease with the symptoms of the medicine. And then we're giving that medicine in order to alter the course of the disease. So, two other clarifications before we go. In homeopathy land, disease isn't what we're used to calling it. What in the past, what you guys call disease and what we call disease, speaking like homeopaths, are two different things. So what we're used to, what we've been trained as and grown up as, and what I learned in medical school, the disease is actually the diagnosis or the diagnostic label. So the diabetes, the heart failure, the bunion, the hemorrhoid, the epilepsy, the milk fever, the whatever, that's just the diagnostic label. And it doesn't necessarily encompass everything that's going on in the totality of the whole. In homeopathy land and in regenerative land, the disease is actually the whole process. And it doesn't have one label. The disease is the fundamental imbalance that the individual has, or even indeed the herd might have. And we divvy it up into two categories of disease, imbalance, and one is acute and one is chronic. Acute and chronic in homeopathy land have nothing to do with the timeline. Acute disease is an imbalance that happens typically as a result of a toxin or a trauma or a epidemic where everybody's doing the same thing. And it's got a period of onset and it's got a period of resolution. And if it doesn't kill you, they tend to get over it on their own. And chronic disease is everything else. And chronic disease, it doesn't It's not a timeline thing. In our other land, when we were talking before today, chronic disease was, well, if it's lasted more than 2 weeks, it's chronic, right? Not in homeopathy land. In homeopathy land, I can have chronic disease from time equals 0. I can be born with chronic disease. And what that means is it's a fundamental imbalance that is such that the individual can't recover from it without some sort of dynamic intervention. We're going to leave dynamic intervention on the shelf. I'll put it up over on my windowsill here for a minute, and I'll come back and talk about that. So let's not get disease and diagnostic label confused. Disease is the process and the imbalance from henceforth in this conversation. And all a symptom is the body's articulation of that underlying imbalance. It's not good, it's not bad. It really is the best voice that the body has. And it serves to act as a vent and lets that body, that individual, continue to function. It's compromised, but it's going to function. And so the problem happens when the body goes to all of this trouble to make a symptom, because that's the vent. That it's like some people have equated it to the warning light on the dashboard. You know, it says that something ain't right, guys. And if we smear something on or potion something on and make that thing go away without understanding why it's there or how it could be related to other symptoms, we don't do them any favors in the long term. It's just like kind of turning the light out. Now, we can also manipulate symptoms in a non-curative way. We can do this with homeopathy. We can do it with herbs. People come to me, they're really mad. Most people who come to me are really mad. They're mad because they hate conventional medicine and they're stupid and all these drugs are bad and all these steroids are bad and it's all bad. And we need to use natural medicines because they're good and they're safe and they won't hurt. And, you know, and I'm here to tell you, we can do as much or more damage with natural medicines used inappropriately and without the yardstick that we're going to talk about in a minute as we can with you know, conventional pharmaceutical medicines. And so don't trick yourself. You'll be hurt to do that. So we're going to talk about patterns of disease. And so in order to make this make sense, this whole symptom thing make sense, we need to start to be able to talk about what kind of symptoms are, what they are, you know. And in just like taking an X-ray, we look at different views in order to get a picture of the whole. I can't tell how wide this is if I look at it this way. I have to turn it this way to look, or how deep it is, right? So we need different views. So we need this multi-dimensional view of the pattern. All we're doing in homeopathy land, and actually all we're doing in grazing management also, is looking at patterns. We're looking at patterns, recognizing the subtle things that start to show about patterns. I can learn, we all could be taught to learn how to speak land. So I can go onto a piece of land and talk about what the water movement cycle is, talk about what the energy cycle is, because of those little hints and clues they give us. So we talk about the location of the symptom. We talk about what kind of symptom it is, the nature of the symptom, and we talk about the continuum. How long has it been present, and how have those symptoms, not the imbalance, but the articulation, the symptoms, how has that changed and shifted over time? Have they been able to put a symptom somewhere and keep it there, or did it get tired and start moving at different places? This is not a thought process. This is a functionally innate process. This is what that thing that makes us spark, that makes us us instead of just a lump of meat. That's what drives this. This is driven by the vitality. This is not, oh, I think I'm going to do this, and it's fundamental in the thing that enlivens us. So if bodies can, they're always going to put symptoms on the most exterior spot, least harmful to the overall functioning. If they get tired, if they don't have the energy to do that, it goes back to a more interior place. Then it goes to deeper organs, and then it goes to really serious mental and emotional stuff. And sometimes individuals are born where they don't have enough vitality to make a skin symptom or an ear symptom. They might have their symptoms on the digestive tract as the first thing that we see, or they might have their symptom in their heart or in their liver. So we don't always see in the individual. Often though, we'll see in the generations when we talk, remember the timeline we talked about? So I can look and I might see in the parental generation might have had skin symptoms and ear symptoms that weren't treated in a curative manner. The subsequent generation might have ear symptoms and gut symptoms. It's the same thing, when we talk about looking at asthma and gut stuff. So exterior, more interior, deeper and deeper into the meat of organs and structures, and then really big, scary, not just like, oh, I'm not feeling good, but like really deep, scary mental and emotional symptoms, stuff that gets psychiatric stuff. Then we look at one axis is where is it? And the other axis is what kind is it? So is it a symptom that's a sensation? Something's not right. I don't feel right. Like I'm not throwing up. My temperature's fine. I just don't feel right. Or I might have a sensation like I've got a cramp, or I've got a sensation that there's a hair here, or there's a sensation that there's a feeling of pain or something that comes up my arm. But everything tests out, within normal limits. Now, as we start to change how we test things, we learned this diagnostically. I palpate in a completely different way than I was taught in vet school. So you can palpate energies, you can palpate subtle stucknesses of bones, you can palpate fascia, so when we say everything is normal, we might have a sensation of a sticking in our shoulder, and in conventional land it's normal, but because I know how to palpate like a chiropractor or a craniosacral therapist, I can say, oh no, there's a fascial restriction, or your your articulation at your rotator cuff is not in free and fluid motion. But so there's layers upon layers. Sensation first, ain't feeling right. Most of those things get given a psychiatric deficiency, and they have a Prozac deficiency, a psychiatric diagnosis and a Prozac deficiency, because conventionally we don't know how to deal with that. We don't know how to deal with something we can't label and put in a box. And then we have like a function. The function changes. I'm not feeling right, and I'm flushed, or I have diarrhea. The structure of my wall, or I have a temperature. The structure of my gut wall is fine. I don't have any abnormal cells. I'm just pooping loose and frequently. Then we start seeing mild changes like flushing, blushing. You might see like discoloration. You might see lumps and bumps. So it goes from like the mild changes to the deeper sorts of changes. And then we see, like this total disarray where the body doesn't know whether to, fold the laundry or answer the phone or take out the garbage. It just gets itself all in a muddle. And so we can start seeing those different patterns. So we might have an individual who's got a really big structural thing out on the surface, so they might have a wart or a growth or something, but instead of being deep in the meat, it's on the surface. Or we might have somebody who's got a symptom that's deep, like in my heart, but it's functionally fine. I just have a sensation where there's a constriction or a cramping, or I might have a function where I get a couple of fast beats, but structurally it's fine. So part of our job as a homeopath is, without putting a diagnostic label on it, just get a little map in your head, look at the pattern. Is that individual got a lot of sensation symptoms? Do they have a lot of interior symptoms? Do they have a history of they had skin symptoms or foot symptoms or ear symptoms? And now we have liver symptoms or reproductive symptoms. So all we're looking at is the pattern. I don't care what you call it. In fact, the label diagnosis will trick you, because somebody will say, I have we'll talk about it, because we're going to talk about mastitis in the last 10 minutes here with any kind of grace. I got a cow with mastitis. What's the treatment? And my question is, how does she show her mastitis? So then we get an idea of the pattern. So we talked about this. You need to see what the naturally occurring disease is. We're going to match the symptoms, and we're going to take the obstacles out. So if I'm feeding my cows like pigs, my symptoms are going to show me cows fed like pig symptoms. They're not going to show me Bossy's true symptoms. And so our goal as a homeopath is to give the remedy and get a response. And what we need to do is not just give the remedy and walk away. We need to give the remedy and look at what the response is. And the pattern and the pace of that response is going to tell me whether my prescription was appropriate, and it's going to tell me about the vitality of the patient. So you got to follow up. And the biggest trouble that I see when we coach, I coach a lot of farmers to do this on their own, you know. And the biggest problem that I see is, hey, Sue, I gave remedy X. What happened? Nothing happened. Or nothing. It never happens that nothing happens. It may be that the symptom that you have are the biggest concern or the scariest thing or whatever might not have changed, but it's really rare that nothing happens if you're close. But we need to follow up. It's playing cards. I play the remedy card, they play the response card. I look at the response card, I make a judgment based on what that response is do I just leave them alone now because they're chugging along? You know, the vehicle started and it's rolling along and doesn't need anything, or is it need to be repeated because we get a response, and if it's the right pattern and then the response wanes, and so I need to remind it and give it a, you know. But the follow-up, if you don't follow up, if you're not going to follow up, don't even give the remedy. So we're talking about what's cured. A lot of times what's cured in the old school, not the old school, the conventional school, is the thing that was bugging me the most, that was scaring me the most, that I went in your door because I wanted it fixed. If that goes away, it's cured. Forget about the fact that maybe like a client of mine had a cat that I was treating. The presenting complaint was that it had a big tumor in its mouth. And, oh, by the way, it hid in the closet and was scared of people and a bunch of other things. And the guy got really nervous because treating the cat, the tumor quit growing. And he quit hiding in the closet. He was out and about. He was really affectionate. It was a Bible study group would come over and they'd come out in people's laps and all that sort of stuff. But he got really scared because the mass, it wasn't growing, but it didn't fall off and it didn't disappear like it would have if it had been cut off on Thursday afternoon surgery. So he found this magic herbal thing and he said, oh, the guy said it's really good for cancer, so I'm going to start giving it to my cat. So he painted it on the cat's thing and he gave him a couple drops. And the mass started getting smaller, but the cat started hiding in the closet. Some of the old, like deep disease behaviors came back. That's not cured. That's like a manipulation where we push this head underwater and this head came up. You know, we took a superficial thing, big and scary. He had a big scary label on it, but it's relatively healthier to have something sitting in your mouth not doing anything than to be so distraught with your environment that you hide in the closet for 3 days when the study group people come over. So we look at this response to remedy in the pattern and the pace, and we can make prognostic things about that. And the only pattern that you need to know about for here is a curative pattern, because if it's not curative, then we don't, you know, it's something else and we need to correct it anyway. So it's a process over time. It involves the whole being. What happens is the most life-threatening symptoms resolve first. Things cure from interior to exterior, core to periphery, top to bottom. Sometimes the old symptoms will come out. The symptoms will become more exterior. So my heart will settle down, but my skin stuff will show up. And we'll see a pattern of that return of old symptoms. So I might have had an ear symptom when I was a child that I haven't seen for 40 years. There's a very good likelihood in a positive response to homeopathic prescribing, you're going to see that ear symptom come back for, you know, usually transiently. And when I look at it, involves the whole being, not just one symptom. One of the things that happens first is the mental and emotional state changes. So you might still be puking and you have diarrhea and you're sweaty and feverish, but you know you're not going to die. Whereas 3 hours ago, you knew, like you just knew you were going to die. You were like, seriously knew that. And we see this in animals first. So when they give a medicine, when folks give a medicine and say what happened, well, nothing, you know, they're still doing this and this and this. They forget to look, like that look in their eyes better. they're interacting more. They're not over in the corner as much. They've come up to the bunk. They're not as restless, that sort of stuff. So don't just measure the yardstick with the one symptom that scares you the most or the one that sort of is the umbrella of the diagnostic label. But this pattern, if it's not this pattern, you need to make a change. I had a lady one time, I do a bunch of, like, I do farm coaching with her. She figures out remedies and that sort of stuff. And I do some troubleshooting with her, but she doesn't call me up and say, hey, Sue, what's the remedy that I need to give? You know, she's interested in learning this stuff. So I mentor her and coach her about medicines to give. And so when I first met her, she was a homeopathy study group lady, bright, paid attention. Nobody told her this part. So she was all interested in finding remedies. She didn't know any of this other stuff. So they bought in some calves. They had 5 of them, I think. They were basically stockyard calves that some guy had gone and bought a bunch of calves. And anyway, and this calf had a snotty nose. And she gave a remedy that she thought was the study group remedy for snotty nose. And she gave it to the calf, and then calf quit having a snotty nose. And she was really happy. Isn't homeopathy wonderful? It works great. Great. 3 days later, the calf's got a temperature of 107. He's really not breathing well at all, and he's not eating. And so now we've got the exterior, right? It's more positive to have exterior stuff than it is to have lung stuff. And so what happened was, it was a close enough remedy that we got a response, but the pattern of the response wasn't this thing that's on my screen and your screen. The pattern of the response was a snot quit, and it wasn't like it caught pneumonia from the nose. It wasn't like that, but the dynamic where the symptom was, it moved from the exterior to the interior. Now we've got a really sick calf. He's 107. He's got a respiratory rate of like 3,000,009, really shallow, and he's got really bad pneumonia. So I chose a remedy for her. Like, this was not the time to send her back to the books and play around for 3 days. I said to her, I want you to do this. And I said, he's going to make snot again. Like don't. And if he makes snot, I'm going to, I don't know what I'm going to do. Astrally project myself to Idaho and break your arm or something. He's going to make snot. Don't make the snot go away. It's relatively healthier to have functioning lungs, a temperature that's 102 or even 103, and be making snot. So don't get tricked. You guys know better now. You may not have played the game enough, but you know better. Don't get tricked. One of the beauties, there's no withdrawal times, none for meat, none for milk. There's no resistance. All this stuff about bacterial resistance. Oh my God, in 2017, we changed all these rules and everybody got scared about what are we going to do. It's just not an issue. It's totally not an issue. For those of you who are using this in your milk house, you do need some specific materia medication information in the milk house, and it has to include withdrawal times. I have to actually write on the label, when I write my label, 0 meat withdrawal, 0 milk withdrawal. If there's a instruction page that you leave in the milk house for the medicine, there, it has to say on there. The label, the medicine isn't going to be labeled like that. It's not going to be labeled like that. But if I mix a medicine up in a dropper bottle and leave it, which is one way to do it. Most people work out of a remedy kit or something. So we need that specific materia medica information. And I'm here to tell you, and I'm not saying it's right, and I'm not saying it's wrong, but I also know that a lot of people don't keep these things in their milk house either. So when the inspector comes, it's not there. But I don't want to necessarily sway anybody's behavior. I'm going to just go through these real quick. These are some people say, oh, this is all crap. It doesn't work. It's placebo. Blah, blah, blah. We've got some really nice studies to talk about how it works. So we're looking here about the use of homeopathic care and how it reduced the antimicrobials on the farm. These were situations where typically the people were doing like homeopathy for compliance as opposed to some heartfelt drive and love of it. But where we're looking at, a 33% decrease in the use of antimicrobials on the farm in 1 year, as these guys learned how to use homeopathy. We're looking at mastitis, the reduction in use of antimicrobials and mastitis of up to 75% in them. We're looking at, great improvement with the effectiveness of homeopathy in mastitis. E. coli diarrhea in pigs, they had 100 out of 250 pigs had diarrhea versus 63 out of 202 in the placebo. They had less severe diarrhea, and they had like fewer days of the diarrhea with it. And this is a human study that they did with people with sepsis, bloodborne infections. It was a randomized, placebo-controlled. This is, some people think it's the gold standard. I am not convinced for a lot of reasons that, anyway. But they had a statistically higher day 180 survival rate in the people who were treated with homeopathic medicines than they did in the placebo group. So don't let anybody tell you there isn't studies. And I, honest to God, have a stack of studies like this, about like good studies on homeopathy. How does it work? It's because we have a primary chemical effect of the medicine. It works the same as any other medicine works, exactly the same as any other medicine works. We have a primary chemical effect of the medicine, and we have the secondary response of the body. And the secondary response of the body is always opposite in nature and direction of the primary chemical effect of the medicine. So traditionally, conventionally, you have a fever, you give an anti-fever medicine, and the body, the fever stays down, primary chemical effect, but the body's response is to make more fever. So we give more medicine, the body's response is to make more fever. We see it, Visine gets the red out, drops, right? Rebound redness happens, drop, vasoconstriction, the red goes away, and we get rebound vasodilation, and we get rebound redness. They put it on the Visine bottle. Same with rebound congestion after migraine medicine and headache, or rebound anti-decongestants and rebound migraines after migraine medicine, and rebound muscle spasms after Robaxin and muscle relaxants. So in homeopathy land, we know what we do is we know what our primary effect of the medicine is, because we know what our medicines do. We know what the body, we're going to match our medicine to our patient's symptoms, right? The matching game. So I have a fever. I want to take my patient a little bit more into the fever. So I give them a little bit of the medicine that if I gave it to a healthy individual is going to make them have a fever. And I control the primary chemical effect by dilution. So I just want to take him a tiny little bit into his fever. Then my medicine gets used up because they're not finite, right? Or they're not infinite, I mean. So I push them a tiny little bit into the fever with my medicine. The medicine gets exhausted, and the body's response is to come out of the fever. The beauty of this, if you can wrap your head around it, is then I can push them into a tiny little bit more of a fever where they're sensitive to light and to loud noises, and their ears get really red and their heart is pounding. I can push them specifically into that kind of a fever, as opposed to a fever where they're like sweating and restless. So if you know what the symptoms are and what the modifiers and the modalities of the symptoms are, then we can really specifically have choose medicines. But don't let anybody tell you they don't know how homeopathic medicines work. And don't let anybody tell you that they know how conventional medicines work. The most commonly, we don't know how most of the antibiotics work. We don't know how steroids work. We don't know how prednisone works. No, they have no clue. Like the real science, capital S guys, they have no idea how it works. So don't have anybody be telling you that homeopathy is bad because we don't know how it works, and conventional medicine is good because they know how it works. Like because there's a whole double standard there. That's how it works. This is what they look like. It's a little bit out of, or can look like. I've got a collection of medicines. They come in different sizes of pellets, which you probably can't see on your screen. This is a really old bottle. They come in big pellets, little pellets. It doesn't really matter the size of the pellet from your perspective at all. And we give the remedies. Some people give them dry. I tend to mix them up in water, and they end up in a dropper bottle. And to mix this dropper bottle up, what I would do is take a clean virgin dropper bottle. I'll put one pellet. The dose, they got to label it with something. So they'll say 10 to 30 or whatever. One pellet, maybe two pellets in that dropper bottle. And then I fill it up with the cleanest water I've got. Usually as spring water, not distilled, but usually as spring water. I try not to use chlorinated water. Having said that, I've used roof runoff water out in the fields places. And if I want to keep it, I put a little bit of vodka in it. And the vodka will help it from growing mold and crap, and it'll also preserve the carbon in it, so it holds the remedy in a state. So you can dispense like this. For the medicines you use a lot, this works great, and it keeps you from like fumbling around in your mittens and the field and trying to get a pellet, and oh my God, what do I do with it? The other way I'll mix them is I'll mix them in bottles like this, or I'll mix them in a canning jar like this, or I'll mix them in a lot of times when I'm working in the field with somebody, I'm not a plastic lover, but I'll mix them in a bottled water, a drinking bottle water, you know, couple pellets, shake it up, works perfectly fine. You typically, if you want to really talk about philosophical homeopathy, the medicine should be given wet. In a water dilution. We can actually give them by olfaction. We can smell them. We put them in the mouth. Paul Detloff, a colleague of mine, is his favorite. He uses pellets, not wet, for a bunch of reasons, which it's immaterial right now. Paul likes to put things in the vulva, but that's because he's a dairy vet, and that's the only end of a cow he tends to see. I tend to prefer to present them at the other end of the animal. So I'm not a in the vulva person with medicines like that. We can mix them up in a spray bottle, as I said. So if you can catch the animal, or if you know, you can put them in the mouth. You don't need to crank their mouth open and put it back like it's a wormer or something like that. You just need to get it on the mucosa. That's all you need to do. Just in like where you load a tobacco chew or on their mouth. I do a lot of dropping of on the nose, because on the nose leather, because the first thing they're going to do when their nose leather gets wet is they're going to lick, and that's a dose. I do a lot of misting on the heads. I'll walk a feed button and mist. I'll walk or ride a pasture, depending on how the stock is used to being. You don't want to get off and walk on your little human feet if they're used to seeing humans on an ATV or a horse. That's a very bad thing to do. But so I'll go into that pasture in the way that the humans are used to interacting with the animals, and, you know, all the animal handling stuff that, you know, like not, you know, and you can get up to most of them really, really fairly close. And you can set this on blast rather than mist, and you can get them dosed pretty much. I've got some guys that put these in their saddle blankets. I've got guys that have used those great big, oh my God, I don't even know what they're called. Those big that look like shotguns, but they're water pistols. You know, they'll do them. I've mixed them up in a syringe and shot them this way. And I have also medicated in the drinking water, and I'll show you a case where we did that. Here's an emergency remedy kit. There's 50 remedies in this kit that you use. They're really common. It's the most cost-effective way you're ever going to buy remedies. These kits run, they're from Natural Health Supply. That's not the only supplier in the world, but they make great remedies. Jim Clemmer's a super pharmacist. They're in bullet boxes. I didn't know anything about bullets until I started doing homeopathy, but they're in 45 shell cases. This is not quite the same kit, but there's all these little remedies lined up. There's 250 pallets in here. That's more remedy than you'll ever use in a lifetime. And I just took that out of somewhere, and I don't know where I took it out of. They're great, and they'll cost you about depending on the potency, they'll cost you like 110 to like 150 or so dollars. Divide that by 50, you know, that's $3 like, I don't know what you can, I don't use conventional medicine, so I don't know how much it costs, but I'm telling you, you cannot buy a bottle of penicillin or Banamine or whatever for anywhere near what you're going to have invested in just having a standby kit. And I would really encourage you, if you're interested in doing this kind of medicine, to get a kit, because there's nothing makes me weep harder than somebody calls me up, or they, you know, I'm on a couple of listservs where I'm happy to give people advice and that sort of stuff. They call me up and they got a situation, and it's really, really clear-cut remedy picture, and they don't have the flipping remedy. And, you know, they're going to order it. Well, by the time you order it, it's you know. So if you got a lot of stuff sitting around your house that cost you more than $150, that's going to be better for you than, you know, than they're do less for you than this might do for you. The beauty of this, you can treat your cows and your chickens and your pigs and your children and the neighbor and you all out of the same medicine. So it's really cost effective. What potency? Lots of chat with the homeopaths about what potency, this and that. Potencies are measured in C's and X's, and that's the dilution. Most of the time, it's X is a 1 in 10 and a C is 1 in 100. And the C potency is really what you want to look for. There was some more modern homeopaths, well, modern, they're dead for a long time now, but Kent and those guys, you know, in the 1800s, they were a little nervous, like, oh man, like diluting 1 in 100, boy, that's a lot of dilution. And maybe that's like a little scary. So we're going to just dilute 1 in 10. But I would encourage people to work with the C potencies. 30C is a really nice potency to have hanging around. 200C you can do. The 1Ms, which is a 1M is 1000C. You probably don't need to have that in your whole library of medicines. It might be helpful to have that in a couple of medicines, like an aconite that high or an arnica that high, but it's not the end of for the kind of homeopathy most of the people in this crowd are going to be doing, this is adequate. Q potencies, you'll read about Q potencies and LM potencies. That's a different scale. Instead of diluting in 100 units of diluent, they dilute it in 500 units. How we use them is essentially the same for this conversation. My feeling is use what potency you have available. Think about getting remedy kits rather than single remedies. A lot of times, you know, they're easy to find. You know, you can get them at Whole Foods and Wegmans and the health food stores and the pharmacies and that sort of stuff. So it's really accessible. But I really encourage you, buying a remedy kit is the most cost-effective way. They look like different things. This is a part of a kit that I have. These are, you know, now I know about shotgun shell cases. You know, these are more pellets and more volume, but it's the same medicine. And these are going to last you forever. You keep them wet. You don't set them on top of the or keep them dry. Don't set them on top of the microwave. They're going to outlive them. I have remedies. Oh my gosh, I get remedies now that are 150, 200 years old. Like they're really, I'm really honored to have them in my collection. Okay. We talk about reference material. We talk about, you know, I'm talking about all these symptoms and stuff. Excuse me while I turn my back to you. We have dictionaries these are dictionaries of symptoms. These are materia medicas and repertories. The repertory is the dictionary of symptom, and they're organized by body parts, and it's got all the possible symptoms and the modalities and modifiers in there. And then behind that, I don't know how the focus is, you can see that there's lists of remedies. We'll get to some that are computerized as well. And then we have dictionaries of remedies and the characteristics. And so this talks about all the remedies and what the head symptoms and the mind symptoms and the gut symptoms, you know, they poop purple at 4 o'clock on Thursday, that sort of stuff. And so that's how we do the matching game. And then the rest of it's just data management. Now they have all sorts of computer generated ones. Some are better than others. Some companies, I should have checked whether they still have, you know, test download ones. There's a Homeoint, HOMEOINT.org, they have cancer repertory online that lets you, you know, look up stuff and that sort of stuff. So that's your fundamental basic reference material that you need. You know, there's some other stuff. The Organon is kind of the rule book of how things happen. That's another repertory. Yasgur's dictionary, because we use old words that nobody's heard of anymore. The treatment goals, you know, this is exactly what we were talking about early. You guys are all going to figure it out on your own. I don't have the right answer. I have personal preferences, but it's all going to be different for all of you. So going back to the holistic management end of things, what is it that's going to give you the biggest influence and biggest potential for change? You know, And do we want to just keep slapping band-aids on things, or do we really want to start treating the root cause of stuff? This, please tattoo this on your forehead or wherever, or somewhere where you're going to read it. And you're not going to get good at this immediately. It's hard work. It's a different kind of thought process. It's a different kind of studying. Please don't ask what's the remedy for diagnostic label X. You will be unhappy. You will go insane. You'll have notes and notes and notes, and then they won't start to make sense, and you'll go nuts, and you'll give it up. And this is such an amazing, powerful medicine to have people give it up because they're frustrated or because they weren't taught the basics. I get so sad when I see that happen. But it's not as easy as drawing up, however many gallons of whatever and injecting it. So when we look at logistics of treatments, how much to give and how to dose and all that stuff, we also look at how do we treat. We can do, and we have been doing in the pandemic, we've been doing what we call genus epidemicus treating, where we treat a whole group like it's one. We can do individual animal approach, where I've got an animal or a person that's giving me symptoms and I treat that animal. Or we can say this for that. You've got this diagnosis, this is a remedy. That doesn't work very many times. It just doesn't. But I do have a case for that. We're going to do some cases. Some of you who've heard me talk will have seen these cases before, but we're going to do them fairly quickly. I'm not going to drag these out because I want to show you some mastitis stuff at the end. And I appreciate we're going to use every bit of the time that we have today. So this is one of the this for that's that work really well. It's one of the only ones that I know. It's using Nux vomica in hogs that have rectal prolapses. I know why it works. It works because of the nature of the medicine. And these hogs that have rectal prolapses tend to be, this is not the best picture of one. They tend to be a little bit growthier. They tend to be in confinement. They tend to be closer to finish. And they're big, fat, lazy things that are being fed too much. And that's one of the Nux vomica symptoms. It's overindulgence, it's debauchery, it's sedentariness. And they prolapse their rectums, and this, a lot of times, this remedy, a couple of repeated doses. Some of them, if they've got a whole pen of them, we can't in the confinement barns just medicate a pen. We have to medicate the whole row. But if some other situations, we could medicate the whole pen. There's a bunch of ways to give the medicine, but Nux vomica for rectal prolapses in particularly in confinement hogs, I would just about hang my hat on still. Thank you, Scott Hoskett, a colleague of mine who died here a couple of years ago for that pearl. This is a situation where we treat a whole group like they're one pig. And this is a situation of some hogs that got bought in from a couple of two different sources. They ended up with really high temperatures, 103, 104, 105. They were really, the light colored hogs, you could see that they were looking kind of pinkish. They had really high respiratory rates. They were really thumping, panting real hard. They had big starey eyes, and the ones that he took the temperatures of, we had like 103 to 107 temperatures. And so because you can look them medicines up. I'm not saying you should be able to jump to this remedy. I don't even care what the remedy is, but because we know a remedy that has a sudden onset of high fever, they're hot, they're red, their hearts are pounding. We know that picture of that remedy as belladonna. And we gave that group of pigs belladonna, and we gave the sickest ones in the dropper bottle. He came doop 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 and dropped it on their little noses. The not so sick ones, he went through and he sprayed over their backs, and then he put it in the drinking water. He had individual waterers. They weren't on an auto waterer or anything like that. And within couple of hours, the 107 ones were 103, and the thumping, the first thing that happened is they didn't have this look in their eyes, and their respiratory rate calmed down, and then their temperature came down, and then they didn't, then they started looking like pigs, and the coughing ones quit coughing. We had a couple of pigs that sort of fell through the cracks. That remedy for the whole group treated positively everybody except the couple. And remember what we said when we plan and we assess and then we replan? Those couple of pigs that didn't respond to belladonna showed us a different remedy state. They got really anxious. They got really restless. They would drink a little bit and then move around. They broke with some really stinky smelling cadaver, like smell like something crawled up there and died, diarrhea. Those guys we treated with arsenicum because we knew that like those symptoms led us to the next remedy. If we had kept giving them belladonna, well, he gave them, the farmer did that a couple times before he called me and said, man, it's not working with these guys. And so we had those ones that fell through the cracks. Most of them shifted, but those couple of leftovers, then we just treated those guys like individual pigs rather than the whole herd, you know, the whole of the herd. This is an individual pig treatment. This is not the pig, but it was a sister to this pig who got squished by a big hay bale and treated her with arnica. This was a pig who was trying to die, who didn't want to be touched by people. I'd seen her 2 weeks before at an open house at the farm, and she was really personable and wanted to be squished and scratched and stuff. She lived in group housing with about 10 other sows, and they kind of pigged whenever they wanted to because it worked for this guy to do that way. And he was dropping a 700-pound round bale over the fence, and she happened to be curious and under it and got squished. And you know, when I went out there, she literally was lying there like that kind of breathing in the barn, and managed to get herself up because she didn't want me to come near her. And for all the reasons, the causation of the trauma, leave me alone, don't touch me, those things, I gave her a couple of doses of arnica in quick succession, like 3 or 4 doses in about 45 minutes. I could come up to her after the second dose. So I got the second and third and fourth doses on her nose. We went in and had dinner, and I came back out, and she's laying there, and she's got all the pigs from her sister's litter laying up on top of her, you know, like they do. And she pigged out a perfectly normal litter about, I don't know, 3 weeks later. This reminds me, if we had time to talk about we'll talk about mastitis. Remind me about pigs when we're talking about mastitis. This is an acute injury. This is a guy who came around the corner with a skid steer, took the claw off the calf, treated that. He gave him arnica internally for the trauma, but he treated this topically with, and I'm going to reach again, and it's going to look like it's in a wine bottle because I made it by myself. But this is Calendula Tincture. It's made from calendula flowers. I have some dry ones. It's also this is a more of an herbal treatment, but we're using the homeopathic indications for a more material dose. This isn't potentized and diluted. This is material substance of Calendula Tincture, which is what he put on that. And then internally, we gave this calf hypericum, and hypericum is made from St. John's wort. We sometimes use it externally as a tincture, but internally, and it's a great remedy for injuries to places that have lots of nerves and lots of blood vessels in it. So ends of fingers, ends of toes, tromped teats, those kinds of places, horn injuries, dehorning injuries, calves that knock their horns off, that sort of stuff. It's a great remedy. So he did a wet to dry. On that. This in the stocks was a couple days old. This was after 48 hours of bandaging it with a wet to dry with a Calendula tincture. This is the calf, like a day or two later, kept him bandaged. He finished fine. And that's as far as it went. So that was an individualized treatment for an acute injury, but we didn't go on and treat this calf after that. Like, this calf just needed to stand up long enough to get himself, thrown out. And that's what he did. This is a calf. This is another individualized treatment. And this is doing like a more of a whole animal treatment. So the calf presented with, holy moly, bad scours. And you would think by looking at this calf that it had been scouring for days and days. This calf had 2 episodes of scours, maybe in not even 12 hours. And it had all this much hair off because this poop was so caustic, it peeled the hair off. These are great herdsmen. They didn't leave this, like, you look at it and go, oh my God, it's been like, how could they do that? No, So we used the color of the poop, that yellow color. We looked up in the dictionary of remedies. There's actually a section about, you know, poop that's that color. And we used the fact that the discharges in the poop was excoriating, which is a fancy old fashioned word that says it peels the hair and the hide off. And we treated that calf with mercurius, homeopathic mercury, and treated him internally, like on the nose. And we didn't do anything else at that point. And you can see how red and stuff this, and within probably 6 hours or so, he quit having that terrible poop. This quit look, I'm waving my finger at the picture, sorry. This all quit looking as red and irritated as it was. And he was up and running around and was a calf. Now this calf, we went on and treated him again with a different remedy. I treated him with sulfur because of some symptoms he showed up, and because we know that mercurius kind of got the baton down the way, but to finish the race, we needed the next medicine. And that we do a lot. I do a lot. A lot of my farmers that I coach don't do that, because they go, oh my God, it's quit diarrhea. Thank heavens, it's back on its mom. Everything's good. And away they go. I tend to be pushier and pickier and say, okay, like, what's the next thing? Like, what's the thing that we're gonna just like not get it just halfway there, but how are we going to get this health calf elevated to its most radiant health? Is in the herd. She hasn't calved yet, so I don't know what the heifer is. This is a situation where this is not the herd that I did this with, but this is to remind me, the herd was 350 or 390 head of dairy goats, and they had a medical record that was about this thick, and nobody knew what was, well, found out finally somebody knew what was going on, but they didn't know how to treat it and successfully, and ended up with a diagnosis of Q fever. But they were aborting all of their babies, and the few that didn't abort were having really weak babies and that were dying really soon. And this was an Amish dairy, the other side of Chicago. They called me on the phone, mailed me the big pile of stuff. He'd seen a couple universities and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, we took the case of this group of animals, and what were we seeing? We were seeing animals that wouldn't rebreed, so infertility. We were seeing stillbirths, late gestation abortions, and we were seeing weakness in calves, and we were kids, I'm sorry, and we were seeing mothers that didn't want a mother. And you put those symptoms all together, and you get a remedy called sepia. And sepia is a remedy that it's a big remedy for a lot of different things, but it's a really great late gestation abortion remedy. So we started them. I sent them a bottle, like I sent them a bottle like this, and I told them to put 10 drops in a quart jar and shake that up and put the quart jar divvy the quart jar between 5-gallon buckets, and then use that 5-gallon bucket to make water stations, like turn off his auto waters and water them from the water, like let them drink out of these bigger buckets. And within 36 hours, he didn't see any more abortions. And his baby, then the babies and he didn't see any early births. So they quit aborting. They started having babies at the right time on the clock, and the babies were stronger and the mothers wanted them. And then what happened, I happened to call, I didn't hear anything back. He was happy and I didn't hear anything back. And you know, this is, like I said an hour ago, you can't do, I wasn't ever going to change this dairy. They had 400 goats on 2.5 acres, and the father worked off farm and the kids were running the dairy. Like I wasn't going to change anything. But what we did see in this group is about 6 months later, they started blowing snot. And they had really interesting, you know, coughing and snotting and a little bit of pneumonia. And he called me, and we treated them for that with, as it turned out, with pulsatilla. It had really fluffy snot that didn't make marks on their bodies. They weren't drinking very much, you know, so they were thirstless, all very typically pulsatilla symptoms. But here's a group that had deep internal symptoms, and now the herd health elevated so much so that that now the instead of forgetting to have babies or aborting babies or not being able to have babies, now we just had sort of relatively mild respiratory symptoms. So when we go back and talk about where do bodies put symptoms, now we had that bodies were vital enough that it could put symptoms on the exterior rather than on the interior in that way. Just to remind me that we can medicate chickens in the same way, and this is to remind me that I believe that as we start to use these, I've got a few projects on the ground like this, but I can't tell you the answer yet. I think we're going to see healthier hatching birds. I think we can change the intergenerational health by, now these are not brood hens, these are egg hens, but by treating those mamas through the eggs, and then these eggs hatch out to the, in the same way. This is one of those situations we're never going to change anything. The object with this calf was he had a big old umbilical hernia. The object was they didn't want to knock him on the head. They would have liked to have got him to market, and we treated with remedy and some practical stuff. And it was a big hernia. It was about that wide, and for a bunch of reasons we couldn't get him. Anyway. We didn't need to get him stitched because we kind of went in and just sort of felt around the edge and bothered it a bit, taped him up, dosed him with remedy. That hernia stayed inside, and they got him to market weight, and down the road he went. This is another, just for you, mostly dairy guys, but we see it in beef cows. This is a management udder. This is not a management udder. This is a chronic disease udder. If this was a management udder, all these other nice tight uddered cows would have big udders. This is a chronic disease udder. And this is, remember we talked about sepia? One of the things that sepia doesn't do well is keep organs in place. It droops. So if I rectal this, I don't treat this cow. I had her on the picture for a different reason, but her sepia sisters would have really big droopy uteruses. The cervix would be way over the pelvis. That she's I know this cow though, she's multiple lactations. It tends to be like the tired, oh my God, I'm so tired of having babies. On the human side, they talk about it as the old washerwoman's remedy. She's tired from housework. She's tired from having babies. You can actually get a lot of these udders to suck back up and look like udders that are beautiful. We use sepia a lot. I use sepia a lot and this is not rote. When the symptoms agree, I do use sepia a lot in those cows that have been flushed. Like ET cows, like flushed for embryos, because they've had a lot of babies really, really fast. And it's disrupt, and they never, they don't go through the whole reproductive cycle in the right way either. And I also am using more and more of it in laying hens, particularly in late lay, because they've had a baby every day kind of with their laying. I'm going to go past this. This is just to tell you how we can treat a case of fowl pox by using a specific remedy that's made from the discharges of the lesions. And there's my client who did that. And she got some of the goo from the lesions and made a remedy, and she gave them to her turkeys, and she gave them to her laying hens. Now it stopped with the turkeys and they healed up really fast. And fowl pox in laying hens, for those of you who don't know, the problem with it is it makes them so they don't lay eggs, and the not laying lasts for a long time, and that is not a good thing when you have laying hens. And so what happened? She gave that remedy to the laying hens, and they didn't miss a beat. None of them came down with active fowl pox, and they didn't make a difference in the lay. So that was kind of like a first aid kind of situation, dispensing a specific nosode in the face of an outbreak that was very effective for that. So Neil, I'm going to come up for air. We were sort of like 2 hours of talking and half an hour of questioning or so, as I understand. I'm happy to entertain questions right now. I also have some material about mastitis if people want to hear it. So I'm totally at your mercy. We could probably get through that in 10 minutes or so. So you tell me what we need to do. And I'm going to leave my screen on until we decide. And if we decide we're not going to do mastitis, I'm going to make my PowerPoint go away so I can see the chat box and other stuff.
I'm going to give you a couple questions while people weigh in on whether or not we've got one person in favor of discussing mastitis, but I'm going to give you a couple quick questions.
Yeah, you guys decide among yourselves, and you know, we can do that at another time if you want, or there's a variety of different ways we can do it, or maybe we can do a mastitis seminar or something sometime, Carrie, or whatever.
This one's good because it's big and broad. Should we take classes to learn more, or rely on a vet/practitioner who knows all about homeopathy? Basically, how can we proceed, you know, on their own? What's
okay? I'm here to tell you, and I say this, you're not going to find a lot of books. I'm going to disappear for a minute because I'm grabbing a couple of books that I pulled out earlier. You're not going to find a lot of books specifically written for food animals or even for veterinary medicine. So most of your book resources are going to be human side, which is easy if you can extrapolate. But some people, you know, I love Chris Day, or I love George McLeod. He's dead now, but George was one of the first guys to write about animal homeopathy. If you get George's books, they will drive you insane. I promise you. He was a brilliant homeopath. He got great clinical results. Please don't buy George's books and think you're going to learn homeopathy. He's got like homeopathy for horses and cows, and it's so tempting. Please don't do it, because you'll make yourself crazy and you won't want to do it anymore, and you'll abandon it. I promise that you'll do that. This is a really great book. Don Hamilton wrote Homeopathy for Dogs and Cats. It's very applicable to food animals as well. It's written, there's good philosophy in the front, and it's written by organ system, you know, so reproduction and diarrhea or digestion and all that stuff. I don't have it close to show you the cover of it. Len Dupree did a homeopathy book for the organic herd. It's got a picture of a cow on the front of it. Saxton and Gregory did a veterinary homeopathy book as well. You want to get I encourage people to buy a paper books before they go to the computers, because you got to understand what's in there and stuff. So you can get a set. Clark's Materia Medica you can usually get for like 15 or 20 bucks usually. And a Kent's Repertory, depending on what edition you get. I'm disappearing again. This repertory, depending on your edition, will cost you anything from $8 to $30. So it's a pretty small investment. There are not a lot of veterinarians out there who do there are not a lot of veterinarians out there who do food animal pure homeopathy. Like, there's just not. There's not very many of us that do that. There's a lot of veterinarians out there who use homeopathic medicines or potentized medicines, but they don't do what we've been talking about doing. So it's hard to just like dial up the phone and find somebody. We're certainly not at every corner. I do phone work. Some of my other colleagues do some phone work. I'm encouraging my colleagues that I mentor and teach with, you know, to think about doing food animal work. I'm in the process of putting together a multiple part course to literally to do this, like in the books, doing cases, more philosophy and like how to work a case and sorting that out. I'm in the process of figuring out how to do that course and how to deliver that course, and indeed maybe working with Carrie and the folks at AGA to do that. And then I also have a kind of loose group, which I actually see morphing into multiple groups of people who we do kind of like group study together, you know, not crisis managed, like don't like, oh my God, you know, she's rolling over and her udder's purple. Not for that sort of stuff, but just regular call in that, you know, you've been doing some stuff or you've started to study and you have some questions. And, you know, like the lady that I was telling you with, you know, the calves that they're, you know, they're working on their own, but we're gathering at interval to do that as well. There's not a lot of courses, and I'm, you know, I'm working on helping solve that at this point. Does that suit Mr. Question? I don't know who answered. I can't see the chat. So. If there's follow-up, just let me know.
Yeah, there's some more coming, and I think you just answered this one, but there's a question about the best place to get training that exists currently, but I think you just addressed that.
It's hard. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, there are some, you know, there's some short courses, there's some, you know, conference webinar-y sort of things and that sort of stuff. But my real bias, and I'm going to just declare it, is I see more people who get into homeopathy and don't understand the foundation and get frustrated and quit. And it breaks my heart. So, but once you understand the basics, that's why I want to show you these mastitis. Even if let's just go and look at one of these mastitis cases. That's just blah blah mastitis, and this is blah blah how to treat it, and this is how to do the case management stuff. But this is how to do the differential stuff. So this is by computer, but you can do this. You don't need a computer to do this. There's little templates that I can make them available to Neil, and he can make them available to you. That have, it's like a graph paper grid where it has the remedy and then blanks for stuff and the symptom, and then you just fill in the little holes and stuff. But you know, in the dictionary of symptoms, they all talk like Yoda, right? Like it's all asked backwards and it's all in Latin. So, you know, we look at the inflammation of the mammae in the chest. We look at the thirst. This is how this cow is showing her mastitis. She's really thirsty. She tends to be really anxious and anxious. It often happens with a storm. A front just came through. The weather changed, and she tends to have a big, old high temperature. So we get those symptoms, well thought out symptoms. You know, garbage in, garbage out. Well thought out symptoms that are changes in that girl, and we start looking, and you know, here are the remedies. There's a short form names of the remedies across the top that tend to be indicated. And then once we get this list, what we have to do is we actually have to go to the dictionary of remedies. I'm going to disappear again. The dictionary of remedies, to the Materia Medica, and you actually read the words on the page and see if the description on the page matches what you're seeing in your animal, and that's how you choose the medicine. But when we can work paper cases, and the only way you're going to learn to do it, you're never going to remember. If you start taking notes and trying to remember by diagnosis, you'll be frustrated and you won't be accurate, because we can have the same clinical. I'd love to do I have done it with clinicians before, and with farmers too. But a full webinar on, you know, here is the same diagnostic label, and here are 7 different remedy states that 7 different patients with the same diagnostic label presented with. Or, you know, yeah, or here's a remedy, and here's like 7 different states that were treated successfully by this one remedy. So,
do you want to take a couple questions?
Yeah.
I've got 2 very specific ones for you. And I apologize, I can't remember what section this came from, but the question is, what about drenching with copper and dolomite? Is that a type of homeopathy?
No, that's not. That's nutritional therapy.
And even more specific, will Mustangs, wild or otherwise, do better nutritionally with supplemental feeding?
I always suggest that we try and feed them as species appropriate as we can, and it depends on the individual horse, and it depends on what the forage, and you know, it depends on the individual horse, first of all, because some are easier keepers than others for a variety of reasons. It depends on what they do for a living, because calories in and calories out. So if I have I rode a lot of miles on the endurance trail in my life, and I used to ride with Mustang Lady, and that horse needed supplemental feeding because she was going down the road, you know, hundreds of training miles and then hundreds of 100-mile rides. So she needed supplemental feeding. So you know, the answer is it depends. I see that a lot of pleasure horses are kept in too good a condition. They're over conditioned. You know, but some of it is because the same reason that I feed people cookies. You know, we communicate our love and concern for people and animals by feeding them. And some of it is that they're fed weird stuff for jobs that they don't do. And, you know, so most horses could benefit by carrying a little bit less weight. So I don't know your answer. I can't answer the question, but if you want to write more, I can maybe tell you.
The other questions I have right now, I think are going to be addressed by Carrie and I gathering up some resources and sharing them with the people who registered.
Okay.
But if anyone else has questions that they want to get in, add them to the group chat.
I'll just wait while people figure out how to do that. It'll be on the right-hand side of your Zoom page, and you can chat to the group or you can chat to the organizers. And as I say, I can leave this now if nobody wants to talk about any more mastitis stuff. I'll just exit this and come back to the chat.
I think, Susan, one thing that we will do as a follow-up is that we will send a list of the resources that you've talked about.
Yes.
Where to get the kits. One question that came through: are there different kits for different species? And I think. Yeah. Great
question. No, don't get yourself involved with thinking you need to buy a veterinary kit or anything like that. Just a regular homeopathic remedy kit works fine. Humans, animals. I treat every species from fish to amphibians to humans to wildlife to, you can do that. It's exactly the same medicine, I really like Natural Health Supply. They're in Santa Fe. Their email address is A2Z Homeopathy. And he makes beautiful remedies. I mean, you know, all the remedies are made according to the homeopathic pharmacopoeia. So they're all made the same way. I just really like this pharmacy. Hahnemann is another pharmacy that's in California. Washington Homeopathics in Berkeley Springs has some remedy kits. I would encourage you to don't use the X kits though. If you're going to invest in a kit, invest in a C kit. C Potency, a 30C. Washington has a lot of X stuff. The other thing, and I love the guys at Washington. Joe Lillard died several years ago, but he and his wife Linda took that over. Actually, they took that pharmacy over when Joe was a shepherd, had sheep kind of shepherd, and started treating his sheep with homeopathy for parasite issues, and was so impressed he bought the thing. Anyway, I'm going to give you a caution about Washington Homeopathics, and they have great remedies. They've been incredibly supportive in the homeopathic industry and world. They make beautiful ointments. But one of the things that they do is they sell combination remedies. And combination remedies are when we put a whole bunch of remedies together and use them. And you may get some effect out of them, you may not get some effect out of them, but they're not what we call pure homeopathy. It's using potentized medicines. But so I always, as you can tell with me stumbling my words, I always get nervous sending people to Washington, because when you land on their website, the first thing that you see is this bottle of combination remedies, remedy for mastitis, or combination for cough, or combination for diarrhea. And I would very much encourage people not to practice like that. And can get into why, but this is probably not the best forum to get into why. I'm happy to, you know, if we want to get a group typing thing together, Carrie, you know, like start a little group, Google group or something for 2 weeks. If people have questions, I'm happy to get into it there. But that's my caution. So Washington Homeopathics makes really great single remedies. They make great tinctures. They make great ointments. Please don't use the combination remedies. That says I'm a boring old classical Hahnemannian homeopath.
There's a question about blackleg.
Yes.
And address prevention of blackleg in cattle. It's always, it's one thing that a 7-way or a 5-way addresses.
Yeah.
But what
blackleg and go ahead. I'm sorry.
I just said thoughts.
It can be tough. It tends to be, you know, it tends to be an environmental situation. It can sometimes be influenced by nutrition. It can very much be influenced by glyphosate mediated feed, because one of the things that glyphosate does is kills off the bacteria that regulate the other Clostridial bacteria. And so it kills off Clostridium perfringens, and it lets a lot of the other Clostridia grow. And we know blackleg and some of those other associated things are Clostridial stuff. So that can be a real issue. We have treated some gangrenous kinds of stuff. I'm gonna whip through this mastitis thing, because at the bottom, these are just remedies that show up for mastitis. But at the bottom, you see these rubrics, the discoloration rubrics. Now this is discoloration for the mammae, but the breast, which reminds me of something else. Cow's udder, like we extrapolate, right? Cow's udders and human breasts are the same thing. So we just extrapolate from the humans. It works really good. Same with locations of things, but you need to know locations. So like front knees in a horse, they're not knees, they're wrists, right? So we have to extrapolate anatomically, but the stuff works perfectly using the human literature. The other one is menses. So we know that humans are not fertile on their menstrual cycle, right? They're fertile at ovulation, and ovulation is separated from menses. But for some reason that I don't understand it, but we can use menses for heat periods in animals. Physiologically, that's not doing the same thing. I know that. Like, we're not ovulating, ladies, when we have menstrual flow, but using menses as a heat period works accurately when we're doing troubleshooting. But back to blackleg, if it's not the kind of blackleg where you're walking out and seeing everybody dead, we start looking at like the discoloration of the skin. We start looking here it is in the udder, but here's in the general, in the skin section. Here's like the blood poisoning part that we see of it. And this is a different remedy, but it's also the same sort of thing. This actually is a remedy that's actually made from rotten beef, believe it or not. They put it in a jar and let it rot and then diluted it. And so it's we see that, these kinds of simple, there's also some really good gangrene remedies. If we've got time, I'm happy to open my Materia Medica up and we can look at those. And so we can look at those for treatment stuff. There are some, I can't remember if there's a blackleg nosode that's made from the discharge from blackleg. I'd have to look, and I'll check that for you, and I can get back through Carrie and Neil about that. Sometimes that can be effective.
Yeah, there was a question about what the numbers on the charts. These
okay. There's a bunch of numbers. These numbers here, you can see my cursor going by the 62 chest inflammation. That's how many rubrics, how many medicines are in that description of that symptom. These numbers here are math that rate things by how often they appear and at what strength. And these, I don't usually put these in. Henrietta Beaufet made these slides for a presentation we were doing on mastitis. But these numbers are how strong the remedy is represented in this description. So this is really strong, you know, like that. That's a third, and those translate to when you look in the dictionary of remedies, they're going to be in bold print, or they're going to be in italics, or they're going to be in bold print and underlined. And that talks about the probability of that medicine being effective in that situation. And so that's how they weight them. And this number here is just math, right? 3 and 3 and 2 and 1 and 2 is 11. And it's also in 5 of those rubrics. So it's way better to have a medicine that's in more of the rubrics at a lesser extent. Like it always shows up instead of just showing up in one doing this and not being in any of the other descriptors, right? So the fact that we've got it in 5 of the 6 rubrics, and the point, you know, so it's, you know, and it's not just where it is. It still has to read in the dictionary of so here you can see this is just this is sort of arbitrary. They assign these a numerical score, add that up, 6 and 4 is 10, and it's in 4 of the 4 rubrics. And this is there's only 2 remedies that have blue in their udders. And so, and if the sources of this, like if the guy's a drunk and he's, you know, talking about it at the bar, is he a reliable source? But the sources of these, the guys who put them in the book, if they're reliable, those can be really helpful. It's more better to pick a rubric that's got a couple or a smaller number. Like this is more helpful, and this is more helpful, and this is more helpful than 260 or 325 rubrics. That's not going to get me too much in the right field, right? Like I'd rather be able to reliably pick from, you know, 30 remedies, right? Instead of, so it's like I say, garbage in, garbage out. We put these big ones in there as for a specific teaching reason. And when we do this course, when we actually do the multi-part course, we'll be working cases. We'll be doing paper cases where you actually look and you know, I'll give you a symptom, and you get to look in the, you get to look in here and look them up and write them down and see what the rubrics are. And then we get picky about, is this rubric really describing what's happening, or are you making stuff up? And if you make stuff up, you're not going to be accurate. So we do paper cases. We actually take a case. Usually it's a dog or cat or horse, but who knows what's going to happen, because, you know, I trust that the elves and angels provide for things. And I've never done that group course before where there hasn't been a case that somebody just showed up with a case that worked out being a perfect teaching case. You know, it's always happened. I don't think it'll always happen. I just trust that happens. But that's the kind of stuff that we do. We do really specific. We do really specific philosophical stuff. We do really specific. How do you manipulate the data? Literally, how do you manipulate the symptoms, the data of the symptoms? How do we pick out what is important and what isn't? And how do we weight those to triage them? Otherwise, we'd have a list of like 743 symptoms, and it's garbage in, garbage out. And then how do we assess? How do we look them up and you know, choose the medicines and that sort of stuff? The only thing we can't do in the course, although we might be able to do it, because usually that course is, you know, we get people in the seats for a couple of days and we just marathon along. But with people, you know, going home and trying things, then there can be some back and forth, because, you know, that's the challenge, right? And I say that I've for 28 years or so now, I've been mentoring veterinarians who are studying homeopathy professionally, and the challenge is you got to do the stuff because it's all very hypothetical. You know, you talk about it and you say, oh yeah, so you did that and it, you know, it worked, right? Well, You know, you always present good cases. You don't usually present bad cases. And how did you get yourself out of trouble when you picked a remedy and you didn't get the response you expect? Like, those are really great teaching cases. They're and I'm happy to do that with a group like this. But I picked you nice cases that illustrated something. And the object of the illustration wasn't how to get yourself out of trouble when you've given a remedy that didn't exactly do what you thought it would do. And now what are we going to do? That's what you need to learn. It's like anybody can spay a cat, right? I can teach anybody in this room to spay a cat. It's really easy until something goes wrong. And when something goes wrong, then you better be like a better surgeon, right? Because that's what's going to get you out of trouble. It's like it's like working stock, right? It's easy. It's easy when everybody's being good. You'll see how good a stockman you are when they're not being good.
Well, we are at our time.
Okay.
And
we can
go ahead.
We can figure out what needs to be communicated, or if there's leftover questions from the chat. If we can get those to me, I'm happy to answer them. And we can, you know, there's how you get a hold of me. Not there.
Yeah, we'll put that in the follow up. The other thing is that what I'd like to do is to get we'll do some surveys and to see where I think as it's been said before with your classes and your courses, it's drinking from a fire hose. But I think the thing to do is it's a starting point. It's a way out of conventional.
It is. And part of the reason that I think about this a lot every time I present is it's overwhelming right now. You go, oh my gosh. But if I just gave you like the next step is like 3 remedies, and it doesn't matter. Like if it doesn't fit those remedies, don't use it. Use some other way of treating, right? Like learn arnica, learn aconite, learn belladonna. And if it doesn't fit in those remedies, then you know, that's a way that some people start, you know? Or some people start by saying, this is the problem that I have. I always have calves with scours. Always, always, always. I have calves with scours. And so then we do the homework before all hell breaks loose, right? Or I always have cows with mastitis. We do the homework. What do they usually look like? What do your scour calves usually look like? And so we do exactly what we did with those mastitis remedies. And now we give you 3 or 4 suggestions, because most calves with scours, in my experience, show up in a couple or 3 remedy states. And once you can learn to differentiate them, then you can be more successful treating them. And you know, is it in my top 4? Yes. Okay, then I'm going to treat with one of my 4 remedies that I've got mixed up, ready. And if it's not, then you can either decide, okay, am I going to take the case fresh or get Sue or somebody else to help me take the case? Or am I going to just treat them with my usual calf scour potions and stuff, you know? So that's a way to get started.
Well, we've always brought Susan in, again, with any type of regenerative agriculture, you have to factor in the animal. And it's part of the whole learning process. And it was very important for me and for the organization, especially for grass-fed animals, because it's, you know, if you've got one thing that Susan brought up is that to meet a program's needs, not using antibiotics, not using this, not using that. And when you're transitioning into that structure, you need something to fall back on. And this is the way, not a fallback, this is the way forward. So I'm pleased to have her as part of our group, and we're going to continue with this. And by making the animals better, then we make the land better. So it's all those things.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the fact, Carrie, that you look at it with that big picture view, and I really appreciate working with AGA and the Quivera folks.
Yeah, well, like I say, it's all holistically managed, and it's all part of it. So we are thrilled to have you here. We could spend all day with you. We could spend a week with you, and maybe we'll try and figure out how to do that.
And in some ways it's easier now that we're all kind of trapped in weird geography. Yeah.
So anyway, does anybody else have any other questions? You can unmute and ask them personally, or any other comments before we let Susan take the rest of the day off. Anybody else?
I've got a question. Like when you want to start, if you've just got, say, everything appears to be healthy, but there's just few things that are maybe not quite right, I guess, where would you start?
Make a list of what those things are, and don't feel stupid for saying, hey Sue, it's just not right. Like don't think that that's a bad thing. That just not right, that doesn't have a diagnostic label, that's a testament to how astute you are as a stockman. Because what happens is usually folks wait till it gets wrong enough that you know. So then if it just ain't quite right, those can be really fun ways to work, because what we end up doing with those situations is usually looking at it from more of for the folks that are conversant with homeopathy lingo, more the constitutional homeopathy type. You know, what's the imbalance of that? So that's a way to do it, and it's really possible. It's quite easy to do, actually. And what I find, you've got cattle.
Yes.
Yeah.
A little late. I just chased 25 of them off the road here.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. So what we find with cattle is there tends to be a relatively, I mean, they can be in any remedy state, but there tends to be a relatively smaller group of things that cows tend to need for remedies. And you know, that's possible. So what I would do is make a list of the things that you don't think are right. Don't worry about attaching a diagnosis to them. Just tell me how they show that it's not right. You know, like, what is it? And don't worry about not sounding sciencey enough, because you know, there's not a person here that I know their animals better. I don't. I know how to talk doctor talk and translate some things, but you know your animals the best. And then if you don't have a place to start, but you have something like they're mostly okay, and they mostly do okay, and I mostly don't have to doctor on them, but when I have to doctor on them, it's for this and this. Then write down, you know, I doctor on them for this and this. What time of year does that happen? What do they do? You know, like, how do I know that they're doing this? And literally that it might be that they spike a temperature. It might be that they quit drinking. It might be that they have purple snot out of their left ear. It might be that they instead of being on a regular heat cycle, they skip a heat cycle. It might be that they breed and we think they're caught, and they show up, they return to service after two cycles when you thought they're caught. All of those things, I guarantee you, all of those things we can translate into rubrics that let us identify a medicine. And I'm also here to tell you that when to push is, if you've got management stuff that needs to be fine-tuned, that's usually the place to spend your time and energy. But if you're pretty happy with your management stuff, and you get an extra pair of eyes or two on your place, and they're pretty happy with your management stuff, then that's the time to look at using this as that kind of tool.
Because, you know, I mean, it could be just my pastures need to have some fine tuning done to them.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you only got so many animals, so much paddock, you can only do so much. And so maybe what is the best alternative, I guess.
Yeah, and a lot of times I see with 9.5 times out of 10, and people don't like to hear me say this, 9.5 times out of 10, what we need to do is better grazing management and better pasture management and better record keeping, and actually writing a grazing plan. For those of you who don't do, please start. And for those of you who do, let's think about how can we fine tune it and get more information out of it and do some monitoring to see that stuff. But that's the thing that people, it's hard to do. I mean, it's hard to do for all the reasons. But but a lot of times, and a lot of times like pastures that are coming slow, or that you think you need a reseed or whatever, I'm a big fan of letting the animals do the work, if you know, if you're able. I mean, and that goes back to like, what's the best use of your time and money and energy, and sometimes just changing how your fence is cut or walking them into the pasture a different way is going to buy you more than reseeding or adding a whole bunch of biology or whatever, you know. So that's that challenge, you know. Where's the log jam? I've been on farms where, you know, they're not going to go anywhere until, like, if I can see the log jam that person doesn't want to do or can't do, or whatever the reason is, can't do that grazing management, then it doesn't matter what I say. That's the log jam, and we're not going to be able to, like, that's holding the whole farm back, right? And then I got other situations where they want to spend a whole bunch of money on fertility, or they want to spend a whole bunch of money on the latest genetics or whatever, and really they really just need to spend a little bit more time cutting a little bit different size paddock and moving it more frequently. And that's hard, and people, you know, people don't want to hear that, and
but it's always nice to have a second set of eyes that see something that you might miss. Yep.
And you know, I do a lot of work with people that I never see, and I don't mean that just now in pandemic land. I mean always. I had folks that I had some farms that I worked really successfully with, and I never saw them ever. You know, they'd take photographs or a little bit of video or whatever. Or I had farms where I might see them once a year, or, you know, when I'm out in an area for a meeting, you know, they'd stop and they'd feed me pie or something like that. But I work with a lot of people that we never see, but yes, having that second set of eyes and that question about stuff, and that stuff that just kind of like keeps us honest with ourselves, you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? We are way over time, and but I want to be conscious of everybody spending this amount of time with us today. Thank you very much.
I'm happy to stay. I don't have anything backed up to this until 6 o'clock my time, but I don't know how you're wrangling at that end. So if there's people that want to stay and visit, we can do that. Or if people just want to have a nice day.
There's nothing else on the schedule. So
yeah, and I really appreciate people's attention in this kind of weird way of doing it.
Did anybody have any verbal communication they want to do with Susan rather than typing? Because my typing sucks.
let's find this and make this screen big.
There you go. Anybody else? Everybody.
I have a question about parasites. You know, we do planned rotational grazing, and it's helped tremendously. But what types of either preventative or after the fact kind of suggestions do you have when you do have parasite problems kick up?
What kind of stock do you have?
Sheep.
Aha. The sheep are really interesting, and I spend a lot of time working with sheep and small ruminant people. Part of it is a grazing thing, and I'm looking at your picture as I'm talking. Part of it is a grazing thing, and getting the rotation, and so they're not eating down low, first of all, right? You want to keep them off the residue.
Yep.
The other thing is doing regular fecals, and the other thing is doing regular FOMACHA testing. And then depending on your philosophy about worming and what kind of worming and that sort of stuff to do, if you're worming with chemical worm, well, any wormer, chemical wormers or herbal wormers, you want to always test, like you want to test the fecal egg count and see where you're at. And then you want to worm and test again about 7 days after. Don't go 10 or 14 days after, because it'll be too long. They'll hatch again and you'll get tricked. And if you're not getting a 95% reduction in fecal egg count, you got the wrong wormer. And I'm, you know, and I'm sure you know, like you want empty bellies and hold hay so that they can, all of that stuff.
Yep.
We've had some really exceptional interesting results, making sure that the mineral nutrition is right with those guys. That can be a big thing. And I'm a real fan of individual free choice minerals. And I have to say that I do act as an advisor for the folks at Advanced Biological Concepts. So, that declaration of affiliation or whatever that I have to do. But I've been using free choice minerals since 1985 or something like that. So that makes a difference. And we see some specific mineral deficiencies. You don't want to worm everybody. The worst thing you can do is worm your whole group. So you want to use your FAMACHA testing to determine who needs to be wormed, like who's got the paleness, maybe the bottle jaw, do the 5-point with the DAG scoring and all of that sort of stuff. And then the other thing you want to do is keep some records, because I promise you that 10% of your animals are probably giving you 90% of your eggs. And then if you want to have some fun, and I mean fun, I'll say one more thing. We've had really good results using the combination of diatomaceous earth, capsicum, and garlic as a wormer in sheep. If you send me an email, I'll send you some clinical studies that were done with that. Some were done in cattle, and we've got some stuff with sheep. You can make that yourself. I actually, on one of my slides, have that wormer recipe. I just stuck it on because we end up talking about it. So that works really well, and it works for organic systems. You don't want to do what some college kids I know that used it for a field study, like it burns, right? So you want to paste it back hard with them and stuff. The other thing, if you want to have some fun, this is a really interesting way to do homeopathy, because you look at those sheep that are your heavy shedders, and the conventional wisdom says send them down the road even if you love them. We know that parasite resilience is about 35 to 45% heritable, depending on who you read. So you should be able to breed your way out of that problem, first of all. And you have to be a little bit unforgiving. Some people say send them down the road, those heavy shedders. And I can give you all the reason to do that. But the part of me that likes to do this says, what if we treated those guys like from the perspective of a conventional constitutional homeopath? And so you've got these 3 ones, and they're always running high. They've got their FAMACHAs are always a little bit crappy. And we know that when we treat these guys, all things being equal, that their FAMACHA scores improve and that sort of stuff. Like the small ruminants that I've had to treat for other reasons, we always see improvement in that, because the health of the animal elevates, right? Mm-hmm. I've had the opportunity, I don't have enough to tell you, but I've had the opportunity with a couple of shepherds to be able to treat that way, and we see changes in their fecal shedding. And I don't know a lot of people who want to do that. Like, most people are they either limp or wrong and worm them like heck, or they send them down the road. But this is where, when I talk about intergenerational stuff and how we can shift intergenerational stuff in a big way, this is a possibility. And it's fairly easy to treat parasites with homeopathy, because we've got a pretty tight selection of remedies that have that. And then if you can get 3 stools under, there are 3 legs under the stool, that they're doing, that'll give you some other things to bolster with. But you're not going to medicate your way out of crappy pasture management, leaving them in too long, having them eat it down to make it look like a pool table, all that stuff. You're not going to do it. And stupid breeding, like you're just not going to do it. You're just, you can't, you just can't. But I've got some really good studies. Auburn or Clemson, oh God, I'll be struck dead by lightning by the other team. I think it was Auburn. Auburn did the studies on this wormer in feedlot cattle and the capsicum stuff. And then we did a couple field trials. The guys at the Fertrell company, Jeff Maddox and that crew there, used to have a commercial product, but we just tell people to mix it up. Like most people mix it up fine. And they mixed it up. The one that came out of Dickinson College a couple years ago, they mixed it up in the blender and did it with their sheep over time. It worked good. And there's also a product that Advanced Biological Concept makes called NOMS that can be, again, it's not going to fix stuff without bringing the whole train with it, but it also makes things pretty inhospitable to parasites, and that can be useful in some situations. But it's not gonna work like the fecal egg count drop thing. It doesn't work that way, because it works different. Like it makes it unhospitable for parasites, and they just don't want to be there. Make sense?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I'd be really interested in that. We do the planned grazing. I've greatly, greatly decreased it. I run lots of fecals. I've got.
Do you have a microscope?
What's that?
Do you have a microscope?
Oh yeah.
Good.
We have my husband's a veterinarian. I run lots and lots of fecals. I've got Excel spreadsheets on.
Where do you live?
I'm east of Dallas.
Okay, so you're sort of in everything's resistant to everything down there.
Yeah. It's a tough area. If you don't plan graze, you have a hard time.
Yeah, and let us know, Carrie, if we're too far in the weeds. Do you know what do you do conventional worming?
Very little.
Okay.
I use, only if I got something that, usually it's a ewe that, just lambed, got stressed for some reason. Yep.
You can rescue worm with the capsicum. And if it's the same line, you might go a little preemptively. And then if you want, shoot me an email and we can just play with some stuff.
All right. Thank
you. We could do that'd be fun.
That'd be great.
Good.
There were some studies years ago that they were doing at heifer on fly strike and different plantings and stuff. I don't know if you ever went anywhere or you know anything about it.
No, I don't.
Okay. I'll see if I can find that and send it over to you.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yeah.
It came out of heifer?
Yeah, Ann Wells.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I know that project. Yeah.
Yeah. I think she was working with Arnica, but don't quote me on that one.
Yeah, that's part of why that didn't work, actually. Yeah, because there's been several field studies of homeopathy that have not produced really brilliant results because they're doing rote for rote. It's just like, to go back to the parasite thing we were talking about, all these people who want to talk about, let's talk about other than conventional wormers, right? So let's talk about pumpkin seeds for wormers. Okay, right. Or let's talk about DE for wormers. Oh yeah, so let's feed pumpkin seeds to sheep. And it doesn't work for wormers because they're ruminants, they're not monogastrics. And the way that pumpkin seeds work is that they've got some chemical reasons why they work too, but they bother the heck out of the parasites, right? So we got this big vat we're putting pumpkin seeds in. That doesn't do anything good, but it works really, 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 really great in dogs and cats, right? And it's the same as DE. You can't feed enough DE. You'd have all the earthworms killed in 100 miles. You can't feed enough DE to worm a sheep because they've got this big vat, and the DE, and
what else do you fucking need?
You're going to have like all sorts of trouble with it, and you're going to tie all sorts of minerals up. But if you bolus it down them and slug them with it, then it's effective. So that's what we see, that's what we see, that's what we see with we got to watch. So back to your point, Carrie, is the reason that some of those things ended up on the shelf was because of the limitations in the knowledge of how to choose the medicines.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you've given us a really great start here, my friend. And
Yeah,
we will get this
fun.
out to all the participants and make sure that people who are interested in moving on we can move on with them, because this is it's a great venue, because like I say, you start with people who are interested in regenerative, and then, you know,
well, one follows the other really and the thing that I'm so excited about is that I've got all sorts of colleagues who were always dog and cat people. I mean, dog and cat people, and now they're interested in food, right? They're, you know, they're telling all their dog and cat people that they need to get real meat instead of commercial foods. So that's one. And then I lambast them because who's looking after the cows? Like there's 3 of us, you know. And then the other thing is now these people are really interested in food. They're interested in land. They're interested in soil. They're having conversations that 5 years ago they were not having. And I'm dancing in delight at seeing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're glad you're dancing with us. So we thank you. And
thanks a lot, guys.
I will put an end to this and let everybody go back to their day. And then Susan, you and I will talk soon.
Sounds good. And I'll see you at some other meetings here.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody on the technical side that made this work today.
Oh yeah.
You know how to get in touch with us. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
All right.